Yo, what's up everyone? It's Wizardium and today we're checking out what if Doctor Strange trained Harry and Hermione in the mystic arts. Drop a like if you're hyped, subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Rift at number 4. The summer had been unremarkable in the way that only Privet Drive could manage, aggressively, almost violently normal. The lawns were identical shades of green. The cars were washed on the same day. The neighbors waved at each other with the mechanical cheerfulness of people who had long ago decided that anything interesting was also something suspicious. Harry Potter sat on the roof of the garden shed with his Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook open across his knees, not reading it. He'd read it 3 times already. The words had stopped meaning anything around the second pass, and now he was mostly just staring at the garden wall and thinking about Sirius. Not in the drowning way he'd been doing in June, when everything had felt like standing at the bottom of a very deep pool. More in the quiet, persistent way, like a bruise you keep pressing with your thumb, not because it feels good but because the pain reminds you it's real. The evening was warm. The sky was the particular shade of orange it went just before it decided to be purple, and somewhere 3 streets over, somebody was mowing their lawn for what had to be the 4th time this week. Dudley was at his boxing club. Uncle Vernon was watching the news. Aunt Petunia was doing something to the kitchen that involved a great deal of cabinet banging. Harry had approximately 1 hour before he'd be expected inside, and he planned to waste all of it productively by doing nothing. He almost missed it. It was subtle at first, a shimmer in the air above the back garden, the kind of thing you'd mistake for heat haze, except it was 6 in the evening and the shimmer was the wrong color. Heat haze was transparent. This had a faint, electric blue tint to it, and it moved in a way that heat haze absolutely did not, curling and folding in on itself like something was pushing through from the other side of a very thin sheet of paper. Harry sat up. The shimmer widened. Just slightly, maybe 2 feet across now, and the blue had deepened into something almost violet, and there was a sound coming from it that Harry's ears couldn't quite locate, somewhere between a hum and a crack, the way the air sounds right before lightning. He was down from the shed roof in about 4 seconds, wand already in his hand, because 5 years of Hogwarts and 1 year of running a secret defense club had done something useful for his reflexes, even if they'd done nothing useful for his nerves. He stood in the middle of the garden, pointing his wand at a hole in reality, and thought, well, this is new. The rift, because that was clearly what it was. Harry had seen enough magical oddities to recognize when the world was doing something it wasn't supposed to. Pulsed once, twice, made a sound like tearing silk, and then a man stepped through it, pulled his coat straight, looked down at Harry and said, "Put that down before you hurt yourself." Harry did not put it down. The man was tall, somewhere in his mid-40s, with dark hair going silver at the temples and a short, neat beard. He wore a long burgundy cloak that moved in a way that had nothing to do with the evening breeze, and his hands, Harry noticed immediately, were covered in old scars, not the clean kind, but the intricate, layered kind that came from something having happened to them rather than anything clean or surgical. He was looking at Harry with the particular expression of someone assessing a situation and finding it broadly consistent with what they'd expected but slightly more annoying. "Harry Potter," the man said. It wasn't a question. "Who are you?" Harry said. His wand was still up. "Someone who just closed a dimensional rift above your garden before it could attract the kind of attention neither of us wants." The man glanced upward briefly. The shimmer was gone. Harry hadn't even seen him do anything. "The name is Strange, Dr. Stephen Strange." "Doctor," Harry said. "Yes, medical, or the kind that's relevant to what just happened above your garden shed," Strange said. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked around the garden with the expression of a man doing a rapid structural assessment. "You live here, unfortunately. How long has your scar been affecting the local dimensional fabric?" Harry blinked. "My what?" Strange looked at him. There was something precise about the way he did it, like he was reading data rather than just looking at a face. "Your scar, the one on your forehead. It's not just a scar, we both know that, and for the last 3 weeks it's been emitting a low-level dimensional distortion that just tonight reached the threshold where it opened that." He nodded toward where the rift had been. "So, how long has it been bothering you?" There were a lot of things Harry could have said to that. He settled on, "All summer. Gets worse when I dream." Strange nodded slowly, like Harry had just confirmed something he'd suspected. "Right." He turned toward the house, then stopped. "Is there a girl staying nearby? Magical signature significant coming from?" He tilted his head. "Number 7, Harry stared at him. "Hermione, she's visiting her parents. They live on Magnolia Road." "How far is that?" "About a 10-minute walk. You should call her." Strange was already looking at the house again. "Do you have a phone?" "Never mind, I'll send a message." He lifted one hand, and for just a moment something blazed around his fingers, a loop of golden light that spun once and then shot upward and was gone. "She'll be here in about 15 minutes. You can't just—" Harry started. "Mr. Potter." Strange turned back to look at him, and his voice wasn't unkind, but it was extremely clear about how many of Harry's objections it had time for. "I have been tracking that rift for 6 days. In that time it has doubled in size 4 times. Tonight it finally opened. If I hadn't been monitoring it, you would have had a significant dimensional incursion in your back garden, which would have been difficult to explain to your aunt and uncle and almost certainly fatal for several people on this street. I'm not here to argue with you. I am here because something is happening to you that you don't understand, and I might be one of the only people in this world or any adjacent one who can tell you what it is. So, he tilted his head toward the house. Shall we go inside, or would you prefer to continue pointing that wand at me in the garden? Harry looked at his wand. He looked at Strange. He went inside. Aunt Petunia took one look at Strange and turned a remarkable shade of white. Not the frightened kind of white, more the white of someone who has made a policy decision about a thing and is currently watching that policy decision collapse in real time. She looked at his cloak. She looked at his scars. She looked at the way the cloak moved, and then she went back to the kitchen and started hitting the cabinets again harder than before. Vernon emerged from the sitting room like a particularly outraged rhinoceros and got as far as "Now see here," before Strange looked at him with an expression of such complete and professional indifference that Vernon actually stopped mid-sentence. It was, Harry thought, an impressive trick. He'd have to ask how it was done. "We'll be in the kitchen," Harry said. "Sorry about him, he's always like that." They sat at the kitchen table. Aunt Petunia moved around them with the rigid high-speed efficiency of someone pretending very hard that two of the people in her kitchen did not exist. And after approximately 3 minutes of this, Strange looked at her and said quite pleasantly, "You can leave if you'd prefer." She left. She didn't say anything. She just took her dish towel and went into the garden, which was probably better for everyone. Strange set his hands flat on the table and looked at Harry with that same assessing expression. "Tell me about your scar, not the origin story. I have the broad strokes. Tell me what it does, behaviorally. When does it hurt? What does it feel like? What happens around it?" Harry had talked about his scar with Dumbledore, with Hermione, with Ron, with half a dozen other people, and none of those conversations had felt quite like this. None of them had felt like a medical consultation, specific and unsentimental. It was somehow easier. He talked. He told Strange about the dreams that had been Voldemort's mind, the snake, the Department of Mysteries, the way the visions came sideways through the back of his brain and felt more real than real. He told him about the pain, the way it spiked when Voldemort was angry or close. He told him about the ritual at the graveyard, about his blood being used, about the way things had felt different since then. Strange listened with absolute stillness. He didn't write anything down. He didn't nod sympathetically. He just listened, and when Harry finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "When you perform magic, does it feel different from other students?" Harry shrugged. "I've got no idea what it feels like for other students." Fair. A small tug at one corner of Strange's mouth, not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "Does it feel like something external, like reaching for a tool, or internal, like moving a part of yourself?" Harry considered this seriously. "Internal," he said. It's like flexing something, like a muscle you can't see." Strange nodded. "Your friend, the one coming, Granger, what about her?" "Hermione," Harry frowned. "She's brilliant, best in our year, probably best in the school. She knows everything about magic, how it works, the theory." "That's not what I asked." Harry thought about it, thought about the way Hermione casts spells, precise, considered, technically perfect. "For her, I think it's more like the first thing, like a tool. She knows exactly what the tool does and she's very good at using it, but she picks it up and puts it down." Strange was quiet for a moment. "Interesting," he said. Then the doorbell rang. Hermione Granger came through the front door with her hair escaping from a braid she'd apparently made in a hurry, wearing jeans and a blue jumper and an expression that said she had just received a highly unusual message delivered by a spinning ring of golden light, and she had several thoughts about that. She came into the kitchen, stopped when she saw Strange, looked at Harry with a question in her eyes. "This is Dr. Strange," Harry said. "He closed a rift in the garden." "A dimensional rift," Strange clarified. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Harry could see the wheels turning, the rapid sorting of available information, the cross-referencing, the tentative conclusion. "The Sorcerer Supreme," she said. Strange raised his eyebrows just slightly. It was probably the closest he came to looking surprised. "You know the title? Hogwarts Library. There's a reference in Magical Theory and its Boundaries, a footnote, Chapter 12. It says the Sorcerer Supreme is the primary magical protector of Earth from interdimensional threats. It's always referred to historically, as if the position might not currently be filled." She pulled out a chair and sat down. "I take it is." "It is. And the rift was over Harry's house because of his scar." "Provisionally, yes." Hermione turned to look at Harry with an expression that said she had been waiting for something like this to happen and was simultaneously vindicated and terrified. Harry gave her a look that said, "I know, don't start." "What does provisionally mean?" she asked Strange. "It means I have a theory and I need more information before I'll state it as fact." He folded his hands on the table. "What do you two know about the mystic arts?" "Is that what you do?" Hermione asked. "The spinning light thing, among other things." "Then the reference in Boundaries has it wrong," she said immediately. "It classifies the Sorcerer Supreme under conventional magical taxonomy. It says the primary method is incantation-based, similar to standard wizarding practice but drawing on broader dimensional energy." "But the light you sent wasn't incantation-based at all, was it?" "I didn't hear anything." Strange looked at her steadily. "No, it wasn't. So the book is wrong." "Most books are wrong," Strange said, "about most things." Hermione processed this with the expression of someone who had just been told that gravity was optional. It clearly disturbed her on a fundamental level. Then she straightened her spine and said, "All right, tell us what we don't know." Harry felt something shift in the room. He didn't know if it was Hermione's directness or just the accumulated weight of everything Strange had said since arriving, but something changed, became more serious, more specific, the way the air changes before a storm commits to being a storm. Strange looked at them both for a moment, not assessing this time, deciding. Magic, he said, as you've been taught it, is real, it works. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everything you learned at your school is useless, it isn't. But it is, he paused, searching for the word partial, the way a map is real but is not the territory. You've been given an accurate description of a small part of something very large, and you've been taught to treat the description as the whole thing. What's the whole thing? Harry asked. The mystic arts, the study and manipulation of dimensional energy at its source, rather than through the intermediary systems your tradition uses. Spells, wands, potions, these are interfaces, they work. They're not the underlying reality, and the underlying reality, Strange paused again, the underlying reality is what's causing your problem. My scar, the object inside your scar, Strange said carefully, is interacting with the dimensional fabric in a way that your tradition doesn't have a framework to understand, let alone address. It's been getting worse. The rift tonight is the fourth I've closed above this address. The next one, if I leave it, will be bigger. Silence. Hermione broke it first. So what are you suggesting? Strange stood up. He buttoned his coat, which hadn't been unbuttoned, but he buttoned it anyway, the gesture of a man about to leave. Nothing tonight. Tonight I'm suggesting you both sleep and that you think carefully about whether you trust me enough to accept an invitation. He reached into his coat and produced two small cards, plain white, no text, just a precise golden symbol embossed in the center that Harry didn't recognize. Hold on to those. An invitation to what? Harry said. Strange was already moving toward the door, to learn what magic actually is. He paused at the kitchen doorway and looked back at them, and his expression was not warm exactly, but it was something, some acknowledgement that this conversation had gone the way he'd hoped rather than several other ways it could have gone. I'll be back in the morning. If you want to come, pack a bag. If you don't, keep the cards anyway. They'll protect the immediate area around this house from further rifts for about 6 weeks, which should give you time to figure out your next move. Then he was gone, not through the door, just gone between 1 second and the next, with the faint sound of tearing silk. Aunt Petunia came back in from the garden, looked at the empty chairs, and went back out again without saying a word. Harry and Hermione sat in the kitchen for a long moment. Mystic arts, Hermione said finally. Yeah, he called our magic an interface. I heard. She turned the small white card over in her fingers, tracing the gold symbol. Harry, I think I'd quite like to go. Harry picked up his own card, held it, thought about the rift in the garden, violet and crackling, pushing through the surface of the ordinary world like something enormous trying to get through a very small door, thought about Voldemort. Thought about the year ahead, and the Horcrux nobody had told him about yet but that he'd started to suspect was sitting behind his eyes, and the war that was going to happen whether he was ready for it or not. Yeah, he said, me too. He didn't sleep well, which was nothing new. He packed in the dark at 2 in the morning, moving quietly through the house, picking up the things that mattered: photo of his parents, the Marauder's map, a change of clothes, his wand and the book Hermione had given him at the end of last year with a note in the front that said, thought this might be useful. Don't tell Ron I spent that much on it. He sat on the edge of his bed and looked out the window at the garden below, which was dark and normal and showed no signs of tearing itself open. He thought about Sirius, not with the crushing weight of June, more with clarity, the specific focus kind of clarity that comes at 2 in the morning when you've made a decision and you can't sleep and there's nothing left to do but sit with it. Sirius had died because Harry had run toward a fight he wasn't ready for, because he'd been reactive, instinctive, improvising every step of the way, and it hadn't been enough. It wouldn't have been enough even if everything else had gone right. He'd been outmatched and outmaneuvered, and people had paid for it. If Strange was offering something different, something that went down to the root of what magic was, how it worked, why it worked, then the answer was obvious. It had been obvious from the moment Strange had said partial, and Harry's brain had recognized the word like a key in a lock. He watched the garden until it started to get light, and then he picked up his bag and went downstairs. Strange was already at the kitchen table. He had a mug of tea that he definitely hadn't made himself, and he was reading something from a small, dark book that he closed and put away when Harry came in. He didn't say good morning. He did say, where's Granger? Magnolia Road, should I? The doorbell rang. Hermione was on the step with a bag over her shoulder and her hair in a better braid than last night, and she was holding a piece of parchment covered in questions that she had clearly been writing since approximately midnight. She came in, said, good morning, Dr. Strange, and sat down across from him and put the parchment on the table and said, I have some questions before we go anywhere. Strange looked at the parchment, looked at her. Of course you do. First, where are we going? He said. Yes, New York, specifically a building on Bleecker Street. Second question is probably what will we be doing, and the answer is training. Third is how long, and the answer is as long as it takes. Fourth is what about Hogwarts, and the answer is that time moves differently in certain spaces and your academic year will not be affected. Fifth, and this is the one you're most nervous about asking, is whether I've spoken to Dumbledore. He met her eyes. I have not. That's a conversation for after, not before, and when it happens it will go fine because Dumbledore is not an unreasonable man, and also because I outrank him on the dimensional hierarchy, which he knows and has never been particularly comfortable with. Hermione stared at him. Then she looked down at her parchment and crossed off 5 questions. You left number 6, she said. What's number 6? She looked up. Why us? Strange was quiet for a moment. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at the table, and when he looked up there was something in his face that wasn't quite careful and wasn't quite open, something in between. Because, he said, the thing inside your friend's scar isn't just a danger to him. It's a dimensional anchor, a piece of a soul, which is also a piece of a very specific kind of dark energy, and it is in the process of reacting to something I have never seen a Horcrux do before. It is destabilizing the local dimensional fabric because your friend's magic is destabilizing it, because Harry's magic is remarkable and poorly aimed, and currently doing things to the fabric of reality that he has absolutely no awareness of. He glanced at Harry, and there was something almost apologetic in it. And because Granger's magic is doing different things that are equally problematic and equally untrained, and if I leave you both to continue what you're doing without proper grounding, we are going to have a much larger problem than a rift over a garden shed. A pause. That's the practical reason. Is there an impractical one? Harry asked. Strange looked at him for a moment. You're going to fight a war, he said. I'd prefer you to win it. He stood up, set down the mug, and straightened his coat. Are you ready? Harry picked up his bag. Hermione rolled up her parchment. There were still questions on it, Harry could see, but she put it in her bag instead of asking them. They followed Strange out the front door into the pale morning light of Privet Drive. He walked them to the end of the garden path, turned to face the street, and raised his right hand. His fingers moved in a specific way, not a wand movement, not a gesture Harry had any word for, more like someone drawing in the air with a tool that left marks that stayed, and the morning tore open. That was the only way Harry could think of it, tore open. Like the surface of the world was a piece of fabric and Strange had found the seam. The rift that opened was nothing like the one last night. It was clean, precise, circular, its edges burning with a bright spinning gold that moved rather than flickered. Through it Harry could see a room, high ceilings, dark wood bookshelves ascending into shadow, stained glass windows burning amber and crimson in the light of something that was definitely not the Privet Drive morning. Hermione breathed in sharply. Strange walked through first. Harry looked at Hermione. She had her chin up and her eyes bright, and that expression on her face that he recognized from every time she'd ever walked into a library she hadn't been in before, a specific kind of hunger. She stepped through. Harry looked back once. Privet Drive lay still and green and aggressively normal behind him. Number 4 with its polished door and its pots of petunias. The shed where he'd sat last night reading a book he didn't care about and watching a rift open in the air. He turned his back on it and stepped through. The portal closed behind him with a sound like a sigh, soft, final and absolutely certain. The sanctum sanctorum hit Harry's senses all at once. It was large, he'd registered that through the portal, but inside it was larger than large, the way old buildings get when they've been storing accumulated significance for long enough. The entrance hall alone was cathedral-scaled, all dark wood and stone and banners he couldn't read in languages he didn't recognize, and the light came from everywhere and nowhere, warm amber pooling down from windows that shouldn't have had that much sun coming through them given the building's apparent orientation. The air smelled like old books and stone, and something underneath both of those things, charged, electric, the way the air smells in a room where complicated things have been happening for centuries. Hermione was turning slowly in the center of the room, looking up. Her mouth was slightly open. Welcome to the sanctum sanctorum, Strange said, already moving toward a staircase. Don't touch anything until I tell you what it is. That's not arbitrary. Roughly 30% of the objects in this building will respond to magical contact, and not all of the responses are benign. Follow me. They followed him. Up 2 staircases, through a corridor lined with what Harry initially took for paintings, but resolved on closer inspection into something more like 3-dimensional windows, each one showing a different scene, different weather, different light, one of them showing what looked like the interior of a jungle from the treetops, and another showing an ocean during a storm at night, and a third showing a mountain range. Harry had no name for all of them, moving with the slow, irreversible movement of things that are real rather than depicted, past a room whose door was closed, but from behind which came a steady, low sound like several thousand pages turning simultaneously, down a short corridor that smelled very strongly of something herbal and precise, into a room that stopped Harry in his tracks. It was an octagonal space, 3 stories high, with book-lined walls on every level connected by metal staircases that spiraled upward and platforms that projected outward at odd angles. In the center of the ground floor was a large circular worktable covered in objects, glass instruments, small mirrors, tools Harry had no names for, books open to diagrams he couldn't read from this distance. There were 3 chairs at the worktable, and they didn't look like they'd been placed there recently. They looked like they'd been waiting. Strange put his hands in his pockets and stood in the center of the room and looked at them both. This is where we work, he said. This is where you'll spend most of your time until I decide you're ready to leave it. The rest of the sanctum is available to you with the exceptions I'll specify. He looked at Hermione. The room at the end of the east corridor on the 2nd floor is closed. I mean that literally the door seals itself and it will not open for you because the contents are not safe for anyone in your current state of training. Don't try. Hermione's eyes flicked toward the corridor as if she was already calculating the route. Miss Granger, she looked back at him. I'm being sincere, he said, not cautionary. The room is genuinely dangerous for untrained practitioners, and you are, regardless of how gifted you are, still untrained in what this building teaches. Respecting that is not weakness, it is competence. Something moved in Hermione's face. Not acquiescence exactly, more like reassessment. She nodded once sharply. Strange turned to Harry. And you, during the first week you will not cast any spells at all using your wand. Harry stared at him. What? You have spent 5 years building muscular habits on top of unstable foundations. Habit is enormously resistant to change. So we change the habit by setting it aside entirely until we've built the new structure. After that, you'll use it differently and the difference will feel obvious. He held Harry's look. I know that seems counterproductive. Argue with me about it now, get it out of your system, and then we move on. Harry thought about arguing. Genuinely felt the argument rise up. I've been fighting with that wand, I need it, I don't know what else to use. And then he thought about Sirius and the Department of Mysteries and all the improvisation, and he said, fine. Strange blinked just once. That was quicker than expected. I've been told I'm stubborn, Harry said. I'm working on it. Something crossed Strange's face, brief, definite, gone. It might have been approval. Right, he said, and moved to the work table. Sit down, we start now. Outside the tall windows, New York hummed and blazed in the summer morning, cars and voices and the enormous, indifferent machinery of the city going about its work. Neither Harry nor Hermione looked at it. They sat down at the work table and looked at Strange, and Strange looked back at them with the focused expression of a man who has assessed a situation and decided to do something about it. First thing you need to understand, he said, is that magic is not a thing you do, it's a relationship you have. Everything else follows from that. The spells, the theory, the technique, all secondary. First you feel the relationship. He held up one hand and light began to gather at his fingertips, not the wand-based light Harry was used to, not the clean mechanical flash of lumos, but something that breathed, that curled, that seemed to recognize the hand it moved around. Close your eyes. Harry closed his eyes, heard Hermione do the same. Find the thing you were describing last night, Strange said to Harry. The muscle you can't see, find it and don't flex it, just find it, hold your awareness there. Harry went looking. It was easier than he expected, or rather it was easy in the way that finding something you've always known is there but never looked directly at is easy. It was there immediately, warm and large and waiting, a presence underneath his presence that breathed in time with him and was perfectly still. Now you, Strange said, and Harry assumed he was talking to Hermione. The tool, find the point at which you pick it up. What's between your hand and the handle? Silence. Then Hermione said quietly, oh. Yes, Strange said. Harry opened his eyes. Hermione had her eyes still closed and her expression was strange, startled, almost the look of someone who has found a door in a wall they've walked past 1,000 times. Her hands were still in her lap, but they weren't quite still. That space, Strange said, between you and the tool, that's what we're going to work with first. That's where the mystic arts live. He sat down at the third chair and looked at them both. Welcome to day one. Harry looked around the octagonal room, the books spiraling upward, the instruments, the windows with their amber light, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not safety, not exactly, but direction. The specific, clarifying sensation of knowing that the next step was ahead of you and that you were pointed at it. Outside, New York went on being New York. Above number 4 Privet Drive, the air was clear and still. And somewhere, in a manor house in the Wiltshire countryside, a man with white blonde hair set down a letter with no signature, pressed his fingers together, and began to think about what the letter meant. Lucius Malfoy was not a man who panicked. He was, however, a man who paid very close attention to information about his enemies, and what the letter described, a dimensional specialist, an asset of significant power, training the Potter boy in arts that the Dark Lord had specifically flagged as beyond conventional wizarding understanding, was precisely the kind of information that turned a carefully managed situation into an unpredictable one. He read the letter again, memorized it, set it on fire. Then he picked up a quill and began to write his own letter, slower, more deliberate, every word chosen like a move in a chess game where the stakes were everything. In the sanctum, Harry opened his mouth to ask a question. Strange held up one finger without looking at him. Harry closed his mouth. Hermione, eyes still closed, smiled just slightly. The lesson continued. Chapter 2, The Architecture of Everything. The first morning of training nearly broke Hermione Granger, and she would later say that was the best thing that had ever happened to her. It started with breathing, which seemed insultingly simple until Strange explained what they were actually doing, not managing breath, but tracing the pathway between intention and action, the invisible thread that ran from the center of a person outward into the world. Every spell you've ever cast, he said, pacing around the work table with his hands clasped behind his back, began here. He pressed 2 fingers to his sternum, not the heart but close, an inch lower. Not in the words, not in the wand movement. Here, the words and the movement are just the road, and you've been so focused on learning the road that you never noticed the engine. Hermione said, but incantations are how the magical intent gets structured. Incantations are training wheels, Strange said, not unkindly, just matter-of-factly in the way he said most things. They work, I'm not disputing that. They give form to intent for practitioners who haven't learned to impose form directly. But the intent itself, the engine, exists independently of the words, and a sorcerer who can only express intent through incantation is a sorcerer who can be silenced. He looked at her steadily. Has that ever happened to you? Hermione thought about the Department of Mysteries. She thought about Dolohov's curse and the weeks she'd spent afterwards unable to cast anything complex because the curse had done something to her magical center that the healers at St. Mungo's had described vaguely as structural interference. She hadn't talked about that to anyone, not fully. Yes, she said. Strange nodded. Then you already understand the problem. Harry had been quiet through all of this, which Hermione recognized as his processing expression, the one that looked like blankness but was actually just deep, focused thought. He was sitting back in his chair with his arms crossed, watching Strange with the particular quality of attention he'd had since the night before. Not suspicious anymore, something else, calibrating. Can you actually silence someone using the mystic arts? Harry asked. No, Strange said, which is rather the point. The breathing exercise took an hour. To anyone watching, it would have looked like 3 people sitting at a table doing nothing. What it actually was, as Strange described it in pieces while they worked, was the process of locating the dimensional interface, the place where a practitioner's magical energy met the outer fabric of reality, and learning to feel it consciously rather than just instinctively triggering it through learned ritual. It was, Hermione thought, the difference between knowing you have lungs and knowing how to breathe. You could breathe your whole life without ever consciously feeling the mechanics of it, but a singer knows every muscle of the process, a diver knows every variable, and a sorcerer, Strange explained, needs to know the interface the way a surgeon knows anatomy, not abstractly but physically, specifically in the dark. I can feel something, Harry said after about 40 minutes. What does it feel like? Harry thought about it with his usual literalness, not reaching for metaphor but just looking for accuracy. Like pressure, but from inside, like something that wants to move. Don't let it yet. Harry's jaw tightened slightly. Hermione knew exactly what that look was. Learning to hold it before you direct it, Strange said, reading the expression without even glancing up from his own work, is the difference between a sorcerer and a bomb. Both release energy. Only one of them does it intentionally. Harry unclenched his jaw. For Hermione, the feeling was different and took longer to locate. She'd been characterizing her magic as a tool, something external she reached for, and the habit was so deep it had become structural, like trying to feel your blood pressure just by thinking about it. It was there, she could intellectually confirm it was there, but the moment she tried to look at it directly, it slid away from her attention. She was good at most things. She was good at most things quite quickly. Sitting at this table, unable to locate the most fundamental part of herself, was the most uncomfortable 30 minutes she could remember in recent history, and given that recent history included being tortured at the ministry that was saying something. Strange appeared at her elbow. She hadn't heard him move. Stop trying to find it, he said quietly so only she could hear. I know it's there, you know it's there, so you're looking for confirmation that it's there, which is different from feeling it. You're observing instead of experiencing. He pulled the chair beside her out and sat down, forearms on the table. Tell me what you felt when you read your first book. The question caught her so off guard she answered before she could frame a better response. Excited, like a door opening. Not excited, Strange said. Where in your body did it feel like a door opening? My chest, she said immediately. Here. She pressed her hand to her sternum, almost exactly where Strange had pressed his fingers earlier. Then she stopped. There it is, Strange said. Hermione sat very still for a moment. It was there. Not pressure, not warmth exactly, but something older than either of those things, something that had been there since she was 9 years old, and had made flowers bloom on the windowsill without meaning to, and hadn't understood it but had felt it, pure and unmistakable as the most real thing that had ever happened to her. She'd spent 7 years building an architecture of understanding over the top of that feeling, and in doing so had sort of buried it. She breathed. Good, Strange said, and went back to his side of the table. Harry caught her eye across the table. She gave him a look that meant don't say a word, and he gave her one back that meant I wasn't going to, and they both turned back to their work. By noon, the breathing exercise had evolved into something Strange called attunement, the deliberate expansion of awareness from the internal interface outward, into the room, into the building, into what Strange described as the dimensional fabric surrounding everything. Think of it as a medium, he said, standing by the tall windows now looking out at New York. Like water, everything is moving through it. Every spell, every piece of magic, every deliberate act of will, it all disturbs the medium, and someone who's attuned can feel those disturbances, can read them. Like legilimency, Hermione said. No, legilimency is reading minds, consciousness touching consciousness. This is reading the fabric. The difference is the same as the difference between listening to what someone says and feeling the floor vibrate when they walk. He turned back from the window. By the end of the week, you'll be able to feel every spell cast within 4 blocks of this building. Harry looked interested in a way that had very specific tactical overtones. That's not what we're using it for, Strange said. I didn't say anything. You were about to. Harry closed his mouth. Hermione pressed her lips together against a smile. Strange moved to one of the bookshelves and returned with 2 volumes, setting one in front of each of them. Hermione's was thick, deep red, its cover embossed with a design that looked like overlapping circles. Harry's was thinner, dark blue, its pages edged in gold. Reading, Strange said. When you're not at the table, you read. Don't try to memorize. I mean that Miss Granger just read for familiarization. These are not instruction manuals, they're maps. Hermione opened her book immediately. Harry opened his more slowly, leafing through the first few pages with a slight frown that suggested he was working out whether he could trust whatever was in it. The red one is The Structure of Dimensional Space by Calu, Strange said. It's the foundational theory. The blue one is Applied Intent, which is practice without theory. You'll find it frustrating, this to Harry, and then you'll find it clarifying, in that order. What do you read? Harry asked. Strange picked up his own book from the work table, small, battered, its cover almost black with age. He sat down. Something I've read 17 times, he said, opening it, and find different every time. What is it? Ask me in a month. You won't understand the answer now. Harry's eyes narrowed slightly. Hermione, who had already read the first 4 pages of The Structure of Dimensional Space and was on the 5th, didn't look up but said, he means that literally, Harry. If the foundational theory is where it looks like it starts, we genuinely won't have the framework to understand the answer for some time. Strange looked at her over the top of his book. Were you reading or listening? Both, she said. I can do both. He looked at her for another moment. Yes, he said, returning to his page. I see that. Lunch arrived from somewhere Harry couldn't identify. There was no kitchen visible from the room, no house elf equivalent that he could spot. But at 12:30 the work table cleared itself of the morning's materials and was replaced with sandwiches and tea and a bowl of fruit, all of it arranged with a quiet efficiency that suggested the sanctum itself had strong opinions about punctuality. Strange ate standing up by the window, looking out at the street below. Harry ate at the table and looked at the ceiling. Hermione ate with one hand and turned pages with the other. There's something wrong in Chapter 3, she said without preamble. Strange didn't turn from the window. Define wrong. The model of dimensional layer interaction, Calu describes them as discrete, separate layers with defined interfaces between them, but that contradicts the attunement exercise this morning. If they were discrete layers, attunement would feel like moving between rooms. It doesn't, it feels like, she searched for the right word, like adjusting a lens. Everything's already present, just at different focal lengths. The model should be continuous, not stratified. Silence. Strange turned from the window and looked at her with an expression that was not quite anything. Harry had a name for something between respect and irritation, which he suspected was Strange's version of being impressed. That contradiction took me 3 months to identify when I first read the book, he said. Hermione set the book down. That long. I wasn't operating from a foundation of compulsive, exhaustive reading, Strange said dryly. Calu wrote it deliberately. He wanted to see how long it took his students to catch the error. It tells him something about how they process information. What did it tell you about me? Strange picked up his tea. That you read to understand, not to confirm. That's rarer than you'd think. He sat down. The model is continuous. Calu was wrong or lying. I've argued with him about it for years. He's alive, Harry said, surprised. Technically, Strange said in a tone that suggested the details were complicated and probably somewhat alarming. Harry decided not to pursue it. The afternoon was different. Strange cleared the work table entirely, pushed the chairs to the edges of the room, and stood in the center of the now open octagonal floor and looked at them both. Sling rings, he said, and produced from his coat pocket 2 small objects, each a circlet of orange gold metal, simple, almost plain, sized to fit around 3 fingers. He held them out. Harry took his, turned it over. It was lighter than he expected, almost weightless, warm in a way that wasn't just body heat, something under the metal in it. What do they do? Instead of answering, Strange slid his own ring onto his fingers, raised his arm, and opened a portal. The now familiar rip of golden light, the spinning circle, the view through it, this time showing a rooftop garden somewhere, terracotta pots and a railing, and beyond it a city skyline Harry didn't recognize. It opened and stayed open for 3 seconds and closed with barely any effort at all, like Strange had flicked off a light switch. Hermione was already putting her ring on. Dimensional apertures, she said. The rings channel the intent. They facilitate it for practitioners who haven't yet internalized the motion, Strange said. Eventually you won't need them. For now they're training wheels, Harry said. Strange almost smiled. In a manner of speaking, the movement is specific. He raised his arm again, made the gesture slowly this time, a circular motion inward, the fingers not drawing so much as pulling, like gathering something from the air. The ring responds to intentional contact with the dimensional fabric. You have to be attuned and reaching simultaneously. Attune first, reach second, and then the motion activates the aperture. Harry looked at the ring on his hand. He found the feeling from this morning, the pressure, the warm thing underneath, the sense of something that wanted to move. He held it, felt the ring get slightly warmer against his fingers. He raised his arm and made the motion. Nothing happened. He tried again, still nothing, but the air in front of him did something, a flutter, a shimmer, brief and directionless like a flag in a sudden wind. You're pushing, Strange said, not reaching, different motion. Pulling something toward you rather than throwing something away from you. Harry readjusted his mental approach, not throwing, pulling. He found the feeling again, held it, And this time when he raised his arm he thought about it the way he thought about calling his firebolt, the deep inherent demand of come here rather than the effort of go there, and the air in front of him tore open. Small. 3 feet across, ragged at the edges, and it showed the wrong place, a brick wall somewhere, not any specific destination he'd intended, but it was open. It held for 2 seconds and then collapsed inward with a soft implosion. Harry stood looking at where it had been. That, Strange said, was genuinely faster than expected. Hermione had been watching Harry and was now looking at her own ring with an expression of fierce concentration. She raised her arm, made the motion. The air shivered, steadied, and a portal opened, cleaner than Harry's, better-edged, holding for 5 seconds before she released it deliberately. It showed an upper floor of the sanctum. She looked through it at the bookshelf visible on the other side. "Can I go through?" she asked. "Not yet, opening and holding first, going through next week." She closed the portal with a small, controlled gesture and looked at Strange with bright eyes. "The intent shapes the destination, doesn't it? It's not arbitrary." Harry got a brick wall because he wasn't thinking of anywhere specific. "Correct, unfocused reach, unfocused aperture. So I need a destination in mind." "You need a destination you can feel, not just picture. There's a difference. You can picture anywhere. You can feel places you know, places you're connected to, places the fabric remembers you." Hermione turned this over visibly, working through its implications. "So completely new destinations are harder, significantly. You can do it. Orientation and intention can substitute for familiarity, but it takes more precision." Strange looked between them. "Practice opening, focus on destinations you know." They practiced for 2 hours. Harry, once he'd found the right approach, was almost irritatingly fast at it. The portals he opened were messy, their edges never quite as clean as Strange's, but they opened reliably and held, and by the end of the 2 hours he'd managed 4 in a row without collapsing any of them prematurely. The destinations were still hit and miss. Twice he got the right general area but wrong floor. Once he got somewhere in the sanctum he didn't know existed, a dark room full of what looked like hanging maps, and Strange glanced through that particular portal and said close it with a sharpness that Harry obeyed without asking why. Hermione's portals were fewer but more precise. She opened 9 and 8 of them went where she intended. The 9th opened to the Hogwarts library, the specific aisle between charms and transfiguration theory she'd spent approximately 600 hours of her academic life in, and she stood looking through it with such a complicated expression that Harry felt like he shouldn't watch. She closed it herself, stood straight. "Next week we go through." "Next week," Strange confirmed. "All right." She smoothed her jumper down, entirely unnecessary given that nothing had ruffled it. "What's next?" What was next turned out to be a conversation that changed something in both of them, though they wouldn't be able to articulate exactly what until much later. Strange sat them down at the work table again as the afternoon light started shifting in the amber windows, long and gold, and he said, "Tell me about Voldemort." Harry's immediate instinct was to give the summary version, the one he'd given teachers and order members, slightly rehearsed and comprehensive. Strange stopped him before he got 3 sentences in. "Not the history, not the biography. Tell me what you know about his power, how it works, what it is, why it's different." Harry stopped, thought. "He's the most powerful dark wizard alive, maybe ever. His spells hit harder, his curses are faster, his legilimency is more specific," Strange said. "He doesn't need to say the words," Harry said slowly. "Not always. His curses work without incantations, which means he doesn't need the training wheels," Hermione said quietly. "He's already operating closer to the source." A pause. "That's terrifying." "It is and it isn't," Strange said. "Power without structure is not the same as power with structure. He's closer to the source, yes, but the source he's accessing is," Strange chose the word carefully, "compromised, fractured. The deliberate division of a soul is not just a moral horror, it is a structural one. Every Horcrux creates a dimensional fault line in the soul's interface with reality. He is more powerful and also more broken than he understands." He looked at Harry. "Which is relevant to you specifically because what he put into you is a fault line and it's interacting with your own magical center in ways that are interesting." "You keep saying interesting," Harry said. "I keep meaning it," Strange said. "Most of what I see when I look at you is someone who should not still be functioning at this level of magical coherence given what's living inside his head." He folded his hands on the table. "You are, in the most specific sense I can use the word, remarkable. The soul fragment is attempting to anchor itself, to grow, to do what Horcruxes do, which is persist. Your own magic has been not fighting it exactly, surrounding it, isolating it. Not intentionally, instinctively, the way a body builds scar tissue around a foreign object. The actual scar," Harry said, "is the surface expression of what's happening at the dimensional level, yes." Strange tilted his head. "The reason the rift was forming above your house is that the interaction between your magic and the Horcrux has been generating excess dimensional energy that had nowhere to go. The training will help manage that. Eventually we'll do more than manage it." He paused. "But not yet. What's eventually?" Harry's voice was very level. Hermione was very still beside him. "When I'm certain the management is stable enough that intervention won't destabilize you," Strange said. "That's not vagueness, that's a specific clinical threshold. I'll tell you when we reach it." Harry held his eyes for a long moment. Strange didn't look away or qualify or soften it, and somehow that was better than any comfort would have been. Harry nodded. Okay, Strange said. He stood up. Get some food, both of you. There are guest rooms on the third floor, east corridor, second and third doors. Dinner is at 7, which the sanctum will produce whether or not you come down for it, but you should come down for it. Rest. He was moving toward the door. Tomorrow we begin combat applications. Harry sat up straighter. Strange paused at the door without turning around. Mr. Potter. When I say combat applications, I mean dimensional combat theory, the mechanics of offense and defense at the level we've been working at today. I don't mean I'm going to hand you a weapon and tell you to hit something. Harry slumped just slightly. The week after, Strange said, I'll hand you a weapon and tell you to hit something. And he was gone. The guest rooms was surprising. Harry's had a window that shouldn't have been possible given the building's external geometry. Looking out over a garden he'd seen no sign of when they'd arrived, lit now in the early evening with a warm amber light that wasn't quite sunlight. The bed was large and made, and there was a desk with a reading lamp and a small shelf of books he hadn't been told to read yet, and in the corner a mirror that reflected him back somewhat too accurately, showing the shadows under his eyes and the tension in his jaw that he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. He sat on the bed and let himself be tired for a few minutes, which was its own kind of relief. Then he picked up Applied Intent and started reading. It was, as Strange had warned, frustrating. The author, no name, just a sigil on the title page that might have been initials in a script Harry didn't recognize, wrote in a style that was almost perversely non-instructional, describing things in terms of result and experience rather than method. When the practitioner reaches the fabric will respond. The nature of the response is determined entirely by the quality of the reaching. What did that mean? What did quality of reaching mean? Harry read the sentence 4 times, got no closer to a definition and moved on. But then 2 pages later, reading about what the author called threshold moments, the instant when intent crystallized into action, Harry found himself thinking about Quidditch, about the specific feeling of spotting the snitch and the way his whole body committed to the dive before his brain had finished processing what his eyes had seen. The zero lag between decision and movement, that was quality of reaching, he thought. That was what the book meant, not the perfection of technique but the absence of hesitation between the wanting and the doing. He closed the book and stared at the ceiling. He thought about the portal he'd opened today, the clean shock of it, how it had felt completely different from wandwork, less like doing something and more like being something, like the gap between him and the result had just ceased, like there had been no gap. He fell asleep, still thinking about gaps. Down the corridor, Hermione was not sleeping. She was sitting at the desk in her room with the structure of dimensional space open in front of her and her notebook open beside it. And she was writing, not copying. She'd taken Strange's instructions seriously but responding, building a running conversation with the text in the margins of her notebook, questions and observations and connections to things she'd read elsewhere. She'd already filled 6 pages, but it wasn't the book she kept coming back to. The portal to the Hogwarts library, the way it had felt to open it, the specific sensation of the dimensional fabric recognizing a place she was deeply, essentially connected to and parting for her as naturally as breathing, that hadn't felt like learning a new technique. It had felt like being reminded of something she'd always known. She thought about what Strange had said, places the fabric remembers you, not places you remember, places that remember you. The distinction was significant. It implied something about the nature of the connection, that it was mutual, that magic wasn't a one-directional imposition of will on a passive medium but something more like a conversation. A very ancient, very deep conversation she'd been having without knowing it since the first time she'd made a flower bloom in her parents' garden. She put her pen down and looked at her hands. The ring was on the desk. She'd taken it off when she came upstairs, but now she picked it up and turned it in her fingers. Warm still, present, she thought about slipping it on and opening a small portal just to practice, and then she heard Strange's voice very clearly in her memory saying opening and holding first, going through next week, and she put the ring back on the desk. Then she looked at the east corridor, the closed room. She pulled out her notebook and wrote, closed room, east corridor. Not to enter, understood and agreed. But why is it dangerous for untrained practitioners specifically? What is the distinguishing factor, the things inside or the room itself or the interaction between untrained practitioner and thing? If the last, what happens at the interface level when an untrained practitioner contacts something in the mystic arts it isn't prepared for? Rebound, attunement disruption, something worse. She looked at the questions, underlined the last one. Made a note in the margin that said, ask in a week. She closed her notebook. She read for another 2 hours. She went to sleep. The next 3 days had a rhythm that was brutal and clarifying in equal measure. Mornings were attunement, the breathing, the expansion of awareness, the steady and painstaking development of what Strange called dimensional literacy. Each day they pushed it a little further, from the room to the building to the block, and by the 4th morning Harry sat in the center of the octagonal room with his eyes closed and felt, with a clarity that was almost physical, every intentional act of magic within a 2-block radius. Someone on the floor above was doing something with a preservation spell on what smelled, dimensionally, like old parchment. 3 blocks north, something that felt sharp and purposeful and slightly hostile flared briefly and was gone. Harry noted it, filed it, opened his eyes. Someone just cast something 3 blocks north, he said. It felt not like an attack but like a test, like someone checking something. Strange was at the window. He didn't turn around. Good, what else? There's something in the floor below this room, not cast, just present, old, very old. Harry frowned. It's not threatening. It's more like it's watching, Strange asked. Yeah, exactly like that. That's the sanctum itself, Strange said. Buildings like this develop a kind of awareness after a few centuries. Don't be alarmed by it. It's not malicious. A pause. It likes you incidentally. Both of you can tell because it hasn't tried to redirect you anywhere yet. Hermione looked up from her book. The building has opinions about the people in it. The building has been protecting this dimension since the 12th century, Strange said, turning from the window. It has opinions about nearly everything. Afternoons were the sling ring work, which progressed with a speed that Strange didn't comment on but that Harry noticed him watching with careful attention. By the third afternoon, Harry's portals were clean-edged and held indefinitely, and he could name the destination clearly enough that he'd successfully opened 3 in a row to the same specific spot, a landing at the top of the sanctum's main staircase, with consistency that felt almost easy. The feeling of it was becoming something he recognized now, something he could find without hunting for it. Hermione's portals were extraordinary. She'd moved from accurate to precise, which was a different thing, not just going where she intended, but going with a specificity that Strange described as architectural. She opened a portal on the third afternoon, held it for exactly the span she'd decided on beforehand, placed its edges exactly where she'd planned them, and closed it without losing a thread of the attunement underneath. Strange stood very still afterward and said nothing for a moment. What? She said. That was a controlled closure, he said. Most practitioners in their first week of sling ring work let the portal collapse. You folded it. I was trying to fold it, she said. The technique was in chapter 7 of your book. You said we were reading for familiarization, not instruction, but the description of controlled closure seemed straightforward, so I extrapolated. Hermione, Harry said. What? Take the compliment. She looked at Strange. Strange raised an eyebrow. She said, thank you, and the word sat awkwardly in her mouth like a language she didn't speak as fluently as the others. The dimensional combat theory, Strange said, pulling up a chair, is more relevant to Granger than I initially assessed. He sat down. Because what you just did, controlled closure, precise placement, portal as a tool rather than an exit, has offensive applications that we'll get to. The fold can be directional. If you fold a portal closed over something, the something goes with it. Hermione's eyes went sharp with the specific shine they got when she was thinking fast. You're describing a portal as a weapon. I'm describing any tool in the right hands as a weapon. Strange looked at her steadily. Which brings me to combat theory. Harry leaned forward with both elbows on the table. This was the conversation he'd been waiting for. Strange spread his hands on the table. The mystic arts are not primarily a combat discipline, he said. I want to be extremely clear about that. The foundation is understanding the relationship with the dimensional fabric, the attunement, the literacy we've been building. Combat is an application of that foundation, not the point of it. A sorcerer who leads with combat is a sorcerer who has missed the point. He looked at Harry. However, Harry said, you are at war. And the people you're going to face are dangerous, and some of them are going to be using magic at a level where wizarding defense alone is insufficient. So, he picked up a piece of chalk from the table. Harry hadn't noticed it there, and turned to the wall behind him, which was, Harry realized, a writing surface. The bookshelves on that wall had no books at the first level, just a long expanse of dark slate. Strange began to draw the 3 principles of dimensional combat. First, the fabric is the medium, not the target. You are never trying to destroy magic, you are redirecting it. Second, information before action always. A sorcerer who moves without understanding the dimensional state of the space is reacting, not acting, and reacting is how you lose. Third, he wrote it, stood back, your opponent's power is always also their weakness. Every significant act of magic disturbs the fabric, and the larger the disturbance, the more its signature tells you. He turned back to them. The killing curse, Harry said. What does that do to the fabric? Strange didn't look surprised by the question. Tears it, he said. Savagely, no living thing is supposed to stop living through deliberate magical intervention. The fabric resists it, which is why the curse requires such extreme intent. The disturbance it creates is distinctive. He paused. You felt it before. Harry thought about Cedric, about the graveyard. About that moment of cold wrongness that had hit him like a wall before he'd even understood what had happened. Yeah, he said quietly, I felt it. If you're attuned and someone in your vicinity casts an unforgivable, you will feel it coming, Strange said. Not in time to dodge it, not reliably, but in time to move the battlefield, to not be where you're expected to be. He picked up the chalk again, which brings us to the first active combat technique we'll work on. Not an attack, a displacement. He drew a quick diagram on the slate, a circle with directional arrows, a figure inside and a figure outside, the space between them marked. Dimensional displacement, he said. Taking the energy of an incoming magical attack and redirecting it through a partial portal, not a full aperture, not a doorway you go through, just a fold in the fabric that catches the incoming energy and sends it elsewhere. The timing is extremely precise. We won't attempt live application for several weeks. He set down the chalk, but I want you to understand the concept because everything we do in the next month is building toward it. Hermione was sketching the diagram. Harry was looking at it with a focused intensity that she recognized as him learning a Quidditch play. "It's like a parry," Harry said. "In fencing, you don't stop the sword, you move it." "Exactly like a parry," Strange said. "Yes. Except the sword is made of shaped dimensional energy, and the parry requires you to open a partial portal in under half a second using nothing but attunement and intent." He folded his hands. "Easy." Harry actually laughed, a short, genuine bark of it startled out of him. Strange's mouth did the thing that wasn't quite a smile again. On the 5th day, Hermione did something Strange hadn't told her to do. It wasn't the closed room. She'd kept her word genuinely, partly because she always kept her word and partly because Strange had said it in a way that made her believe him and she'd believed him. But on the 5th afternoon, working alone in the octagonal room while Strange and Harry were on the roof doing something with attunement at height that she'd been told she'd join the following day, she found herself with the structure of dimensional space and a growing, specific question. Chapter 12. The reference she'd dismissed as an error in Kalu's model, the stratified layers. She'd been right that the model was wrong, Strange had confirmed it, but the chapter had a footnote. A small footnote referenced 24, citing a text with no author and a title that translated loosely from the Old Tibetan as something like the other kind of dark. Strange had named all the books he'd told her to avoid. This one wasn't on that list. She went to the bookshelves. It took her 20 minutes to find it, bottom shelf, far right, no embossing on the spine, small and black and absolutely nothing remarkable about it. She pulled it out, held it. The room's awareness, the old watching thing Harry had described, the sanctum's accumulated sentience, did something she couldn't quite describe, not alarm, not approval either. More like attention, the specific quality of being watched carefully by something that hadn't decided yet what it thought. Hermione sat cross-legged on the floor with the book in her lap, opened it to the first page. The text was in English, which surprised her, old-fashioned English, early modern at the latest, but readable. She read the first paragraph, then the second. The third stopped her. She read it 3 times. Her brow was furrowed when Strange came through the door, Harry behind him, and she looked up. "This book," she said, "describes a kind of magic that operates independently of dimensional fabric entirely. Not beside it, not through it, independently of it." She held it up. "That's theoretically impossible based on everything we've covered this week. The fabric is the medium. Magic by definition disturbs the medium, but this text describes something that doesn't. That leaves no signature, no disturbance, no trace." She looked at Strange. "What is that?" Strange had stopped walking. He looked at the book in her hands, looked at it with an expression that was the most complicated she'd seen on his face since they'd arrived. Then he looked at her, then at the book again. "Where did you find that?" he said. "Bottom shelf, far right." She looked at the book, then at him. "It's not the closed room, it's not on any list you gave me." "No," Strange said slowly, "it isn't." He crossed the room, sat down across from her on the floor, not the chairs, the actual floor, which somehow made the conversation feel more serious, and looked at the open page. He read the paragraph she'd stopped at. He was quiet for a moment. "That text," he said, "describes the Darkhold." Hermione felt the sanctum's attention sharpen around her like a drawn breath. "The Darkhold," Strange continued, "is a book of spells written by an elder god Ch Thon in the First Age. It predates the dimensional fabric as we understand it because it was written before the fabric was its current form. The magic it contains doesn't work through the fabric. It works through the gap that existed before the fabric, through what's left of that original, pre-structured state." He met her eyes. "It leaves no trace because it existed before the systems that detect traces were built. It is absolutely real, and it is the most dangerous text in any universe, and the copy I had was," he paused, dealt with, Hermione said, "destroyed mostly." He looked at the book in her hands. "That text describes it, doesn't reproduce it. There's a difference, but the fact that you found it and read it and immediately understood the implication." He stopped. "What?" she said. Strange looked at her with that reading data expression. "The sanctum doesn't let people find things they're not ready to find," he said quietly. "In 9 years I've brought 6 apprentices through this building. None of them found that book before I showed it to them." A pause. "The building found you adequate." "It found me," Hermione started. "It showed you something important," Strange said, "because it decided you were ready to know it." He took the book carefully from her hands, not possessively but precisely, and closed it. "Which is relevant to a problem I've been aware of since we arrived and haven't told you about yet." Harry, who had been standing in the doorway this whole time watching with an expression of careful, steady attention, came in and sat down on the floor with them. 3 people sitting on the floor of an ancient octagonal room full of impossible things. "The Darkhold," Strange said, "or a fragment of it, a page, possibly more, was in the possession of a dark wizard in London as of 3 weeks ago. I was tracking it when I detected the rift above your garden." He looked at Harry. "The wizard who had it was moving to sell it. The buyer was someone in the upper structure of Voldemort's organization." He paused. "I don't know if the transaction completed." The room was very quiet. "If Voldemort gets a fragment of the Darkhold," Hermione said carefully, "he would have access to magic that leaves no dimensional signature, no way to detect it in advance." "Yes," Strange said. "And we have no counter for it yet because we're on day 5. "Yes," Strange said. "So we need to go faster," Harry said. Strange looked at him. "We need to go correctly," he said. "Fast without foundation is what got you to the Department of Mysteries. Correct will take as long as it takes and not a day longer." Harry didn't argue. Not because he agreed entirely, but because something in Strange's voice had the quality of someone who has been specifically wrong before about exactly this kind of calculation and learned from it in the way that only serious loss teaches. Harry recognized that quality. He had some of it himself. "All right," he said, correctly. Strange nodded. He stood up, put the black book back on the bottom shelf, looked down at them both. "The speed will come," he said. "Right now you're both doing things in a week that most practitioners don't do in a month. Don't mistake correctness for slowness. You're not going slow." He picked up his own book from the work table. "You're going exactly right." Outside the tall windows, New York held its enormous, indifferent life. The sun was going west. The sanctum's awareness settled around them like something breathing, old and attentive, and there was no other word for it, pleased. Harry felt the Horcrux in his scar shift slightly, like something turning over in its sleep. He noted it, filed it, would tell Strange in the morning. He went upstairs and applied intent until the lamp went low, and by the time he fell asleep he'd found 4 more things in it that made perfect sense. Chapter 3, the Kolkata Principle. Strange woke them at 5 in the morning, which was either very early or very late depending on how you looked at it, and Harry looked at it as very early because he'd been deeply asleep and the knock on his door was precise and not at all apologetic. 40 minutes, Strange said through the door. "Dress for outdoor work." Harry sat up and looked at the window. The garden below was dark, just the faintest grey beginning at the edges of the sky. He dressed fast, grabbed the sling ring from the desk, and was downstairs in 35. Hermione was already there. She was wearing practical clothes and had her hair back, and she was eating a piece of toast with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided that this morning was going to require full caloric preparation. She handed Harry a second piece without looking at him. Strange was at the work table, which had a map on it, not a magical map, just a regular printed one, city streets dense and labeled, and he was looking at a specific point on it with the expression he used when he'd already made a decision and was reviewing the logic one more time. "Kolkata," he said without turning around. Harry looked at Hermione. She looked back with raised eyebrows that meant, "I know as much as you do. There's been a dimensional incursion developing in the Cumultuli district for about 72 hours, Strange said, finally turning. "Small, contained, currently to a pocket roughly the size of a city block, but it's growing at a rate that suggests it'll breach the surface layer within the next 4 to 6 hours. He picked up the map and turned it so they could see the marked point. "I need it closed." Harry waited for the rest of the sentence. It didn't come. He looked at Strange. "You need us to close it?" "I need you to try," Strange said. "Yes, we've been training for a week," Hermione said, not alarmed exactly, more the tone of someone who wants all the relevant information before they commit to anything. 8 days, Strange said, "and I've been watching both of you for 8 days. He set the map down. "I won't send you unprepared, I'll be with you, but the closing will be yours." He looked between them steadily. "You've had the theory. You've done the attunement work. Your portals are stable and directional. Dimensional incursions are, in the grand scheme of what this work involves, a straightforward problem, a beat. That being said, there it is," Harry said. "The incursion has attracted attention. Something moved through the rift before it stabilized enough to trace something from the mid-dimensional layer, which means it is not an animal and it is not mindless, and it will have established some form of territorial claim on the space around the breach." Strange clasped his hands behind his back. "So there will be a confrontation component." "A confrontation component," Hermione repeated. "You mean we're going to fight something, potentially?" "Before you tell us what it is," Harry said, "just so I'm ready, is it the kind of thing my wand works on or the kind of thing we need the other approach?" Strange tilted his head. "Interesting question. Conventional magic will interact with it. Whether it will be effective depends on intent more than technique, and that's a variable I can predict in your case." He looked at Harry with that assessing expression. "You'll be fine," Harry nodded. Hermione. She picked up her ring from the table where she'd set it while eating, slid it onto her fingers. "What time do we leave?" The portal opened in an alley off a main road, and the smell of Kolkata hit them the moment they stepped through, alive and layered and complex in a way that British cities almost never were. Spices and diesel and something floral and river water all wound together in the warm pre-dawn dark. The city was not asleep exactly. It was the particular not sleep of a place that never quite stopped. Street vendors setting up at the edges of the dark. A man with a cart of marigolds moving through a pool of lamplight, dogs padding purposefully between the buildings. Harry stepped through the portal and felt the dimensional fabric of the place differently to how he felt it in New York, denser somehow, older, like the soil under a forest versus the soil under a lawn. More layers, more history. More of the specific accumulated weight of a place where people had been living with intention for thousands of years. Strange stepped through last and let the portal close behind him. He stood in the alley for a moment with his eyes closed. "Northeast," he said, "4 streets." Hermione already had her eyes slightly unfocused, the expression Harry had learned to recognize as active attunement. "I can feel it," she said quietly. "It's like there's a place where the fabric is thin, like a blister." "Good description," Strange said. He began walking. They followed. The streets at this hour were quiet in the way that narrow old streets are quiet, full of sound but with space between the sounds making the quiet rather than filling it. They walked northeast through lanes that narrowed and expanded and were occasionally connected by covered passages where strings of lights had been left on overnight, amber and orange, catching the dust in the air and making it briefly beautiful. The incursion was not subtle once you were looking for it. It was in what had been a small square between three old buildings, and from the outside it looked like a section of the air had decided to be a different color, not dramatically, not the violet and crackling of the rift over Privet Drive, but a steady deep blue-black like the space behind a storm, occupying an area roughly 20 feet across and spreading up rather than out, reaching toward the pre-dawn sky like a bruise going wrong. Around its edges, the fabric of the world looked stressed. The buildings on either side had a slightly unreal quality, their lines less definite, as if they were being considered rather than simply existing. Harry felt it before they entered the square, a low and specific wrongness that registered in the dimensional sense he'd been building for 8 days like a fire alarm in a quiet room. "There," he said. "Yes," Strange said. "And the thing that came through?" Hermione asked. They got their answer approximately 2 seconds later. It came from inside the incursion, from the blue-black space which parted for it the way a curtain parts. Harry's first impression was large, which was accurate but insufficient. His second impression was that it was assembled from the wrong materials, not an animal, Strange had said, and he was right. This was nothing that had ever evolved in any world Harry had been in or heard of. It was tall, 7 feet at least, its form roughly humanoid but loosely held, as if the shape was a suggestion it was trying on rather than a fixed characteristic. It was dark, not black, but the specific dark of deep space, the color that isn't a color, and it had no features Harry could identify except for 2 points of light where a face might have been that burned a steady, cold blue. It looked at them. That was clear from something in the quality of its attention, even though it had nothing he could call eyes. Then it looked at Strange specifically and made a sound that Harry's ears translated, incorrectly, as language, something rhythmic and low that his brain kept almost resolving into words. "What's it saying?" Harry asked. "It's claiming the breach's territory," Strange said. He was very calm, his hands were loose at his sides. "Standard behavior, it thinks we're here to negotiate access." "We're not," Hermione said. "No," Strange agreed. "So it's going to be difficult about this," Harry said. "Probably." Strange glanced at them sideways. "The breach first. The incursion needs to be sealed regardless of how the confrontation goes, and once it's sealed, the creature has no anchor in this dimension. It either retreats or dissipates." He looked at Harry. "Which means we close the breach," Harry said, "and we deal with it at the same time." "The closing is the priority," Strange said. "I'll manage the confrontation long enough for you to work. Once the breach is..." The creature moved. It moved fast, much faster than its size suggested, crossing half the square in a motion that wasn't quite walking and wasn't quite teleporting, something between the two, and Strange had a shield up before Harry had finished processing what was happening. A full circular barrier of golden light that the creature hit like a truck hitting a wall, stopped hard, and then started pushing. "Now would be good," Strange said. His voice was completely level, but his arms were braced and the golden shield was flexing. Harry looked at Hermione. She was already facing the breach, already attuned, already reaching. He felt her reaching, the specific dimensional signature of her intent, which was precise and structured and hit the fabric of the breach with a quality that was almost architectural. She wasn't pushing at it. She was finding the edges the way you find the edges of a knot before you try to loosen it. "The edges are there folded in on themselves," she said tightly. "It's not just a tear, it's been..." She searched for the word, widened, something forced it open from the other side. "Can you work with it?" Harry said. "Working on that." Harry turned to the creature. Strange's shield was holding, but the creature was methodical about it, pressing steadily, feeling for weak points, and the quality of its attention had shifted from territory claim to something more deliberate. It understood that Strange was the obstacle, and Strange was focused on holding the shield, which meant the creature was focused on Strange, which meant Harry stepped sideways. Out of Strange's shadow, into the open edge of the square, into the creature's peripheral, whatever passed for peripheral on something with no visible eyes. He put his sling ring on, felt the dimensional fabric under his feet, specific and alive, the dense layered texture of Kolkata's accumulated centuries. He did not raise his wand. He raised his right hand and reached, not at the creature, at the space around it, the space behind it, specifically between it and the breach. He felt the fabric there, felt how the breach had distorted it, and he didn't try to fight the distortion. He worked with it the way Strange had described in the combat theory, not the target but the medium, never the target, always the medium. He found the most stressed point in the fabric near the creature's feet, where the breach's distortion was pulling the hardest, and he folded it, slightly, directionally. The creature lurched. Not much, not enough to put it down, but it was off balance for 2 seconds, and that was 2 seconds Strange didn't have to use all his attention on the shield. And Strange, with 2 seconds of freed attention, did something with his left hand that sent a pulse of dimensional energy into the creature from the side, not a blow but a displacement, knocking it a further 3 feet toward the edge of the square. "Nice," Strange said. "Don't compliment me yet," Harry said, and did it again. The creature recovered faster the second time. It turned toward Harry with those cold blue points of attention, which meant it had reassessed the threat landscape, which meant Harry was now the primary obstacle, which was roughly what he'd intended. He backed up, put a stack of empty market crates between himself and it, which would do nothing structurally but gave him a second's reading time. "Hermione," he called. "I have the eastern edge," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "If you can get me 30 seconds uninterrupted, working on it." The creature came through the crates like they were paper. Harry sidestepped hard left, already reaching, already folding the space between them, and the creature's outstretched, not hand, not claw, something that was in between, passed through a fold in the fabric and arrived 2 feet to Harry's right instead of where it had been aimed. The creature turned to track him, lost a step, and Harry had already moved. He was fast. He'd always been fast, Quidditch reflexes, 5 years of running from things. The specific kind of fast you develop when being caught has always meant something worse than being tired. But it was different now because the speed was informed. He wasn't just running, he was reading the fabric, feeling the creature's distortions as it moved, anticipating rather than reacting, and every step he took was a step that gave Hermione more time. Strange, freed from the shield now that the creature's attention had transferred, was moving along the square's edge and doing something with both hands that Harry couldn't follow precisely, but that seemed to involve establishing a perimeter, dimensional anchors of some kind, spaced along the square's boundary, their signatures warm and steady in the fabric. "What's he doing?" Harry said aloud, mostly to himself. "Containing it," Hermione answered. She'd been tracking Strange's work with her peripheral attunement. "If it can't retreat back into the breach, it'll have to." She stopped, did something with her right hand, a specific fold that Harry felt rather than saw. The eastern edge of the breach flickered. "Harry, I need 1 more minute. Get it away from the center of the square." Harry got it away from the center of the square. He didn't do it elegantly. He did it by opening a partial portal directly in the creature's path, not a doorway, not meant to transport anything, just the fold itself, the edge of it, which in the creature's dimensional perception apparently registered as a wall, and when the creature pulled back from the portal edge, he pushed the fold closed behind it, driving it 2 steps back toward the square's southern end. Then he did it again on the left side, then again. He was herding it. It took him a moment to realize that was what he was doing, and then he thought, well, it's working. The creature was, Harry could feel through the fabric, increasingly agitated. Not afraid, it wasn't built for fear the way living things were, but something like recalculation was happening in it, a reassessment of a situation that had not gone the way it expected. It had come through a breach expecting to establish territory in a dimensionally stressed area, and had instead found 2 teenagers conducting what amounted to a dimensional flanking maneuver while a third party established a perimeter. It made the sound again, the rhythmic low sound that Harry's brain kept almost translating. "Strange," Harry said, not taking his eyes off the creature. "Is it trying to talk?" "It's trying to negotiate," Strange said. "It is offering to retreat voluntarily in exchange for the breach being left partially open." Harry thought about it for exactly 1 second. "No, I didn't think so," Strange said, and went back to the perimeter work. "Done," Hermione said. Harry looked. The eastern edge of the breach was no longer distorted. It had a clean edge now, folded and held the way Hermione folded portals, precise and controlled. She was moving to the northern edge, her concentration so focused she was barely breathing. And Harry felt in the fabric what she was doing, not patching, not just closing, but reworking the structure, finding the original shape of the dimensional fabric beneath the distortion and pulling it back toward what it should be, the way you pull wrinkles out of cloth by finding the grain. It was extraordinary. Harry felt it clearly and filed the feeling away because he knew he was watching something that was going to matter, a technique, a quality of approach that was entirely Hermione's own. He kept the creature occupied for 50 more seconds. Then Hermione said, "Now Strange, the perimeter." Strange closed the perimeter. The creature hit the dimensional containment and stopped. Its form flickered, the loose-held shape going looser, less coherent, the blue points of light in its face dimming slightly. Without the breach as anchor and with the perimeter cutting it off from any exit, it was present in this dimension on nothing but momentum, and momentum, Strange had said in the theory sessions, was always finite. "How long?" Harry asked. "It'll dissipate in about 3 minutes," Strange said. He let his hands fall. He looked not tired, but the way people look after sustained physical effort, present and settled. "Close the breach." Hermione turned back to the breach. Harry came and stood beside her. "Tell me what you need." She looked at the breach, the remaining structure of it, still blue-black at its core but with 3 edges now clean and held. The 4th edge, the western one, was the worst. The part where the creature had forced the breach wider was messiest here, the dimensional fabric torn rather than stressed, and Harry felt it as something raw, like a wound rather than a bruise. "I can't fold this one," she said quietly. "It's too damaged. It needs rebuilding rather than folding." "Then we rebuild it," Harry said. "I don't know how to." "Yes, you do." Harry looked at her. "Attunement first, find what it should be." She gave him a look that said she was about 90% certain she knew what she was doing and 10% terrified, which on Hermione was practically the same as being completely confident. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. Then she opened them and put both hands out toward the western edge of the breach. She didn't cast a spell, she didn't say anything. She just reached, that specific quality of reaching Strange had described on the first morning, pulled from the place in her chest where magic lived before it became technique, and the western edge of the breach shuddered. "I've got the left," Harry said, and put his hand up beside hers, found the torn fabric, reached. Tried to do what she was doing, tried to match the quality of it, the structural precision, and felt it resist him. His approach was different, less architectural, and for a moment it was like trying to thread a needle wearing gloves. Then he stopped trying to be precise about it and just wanted it whole. Deeply specifically in the part of him that had been wanting things to be whole his entire life, that had sat at the bottom of a pool of grief all June and wanted to not be there, that had trained for 8 days in a New York sanctum with a brilliant and infuriating mentor because the alternative was the war continuing on its current terms. He wanted this piece of reality to be what it was supposed to be, the western edge of the breach knitted. Not perfectly, there was something ragged left, a thread loose in the structure, but Hermione found it immediately and folded it clean, and then she pressed both hands together in one smooth, specific motion, and the breach collapsed inward on itself and closed. The square was just a square. The blue-black was gone. The buildings on either side resolved back into their normal definite lines. Somewhere a bird started, which meant the sky was getting lighter, and Harry stood in the center of a Kolkata street market square at nearly 6 in the morning, and felt the dimensional fabric settle back into place around him with a slow, profound satisfaction, like a room after a long day's disorder has been put right. The creature was gone. Dissipated in the last minute, its form finally losing coherence without the breach to anchor it, the blue lights the last thing to go fading slowly like embers. Strange stood at the edge of the square and looked at the space where the breach had been. He was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then he said, "Granger, the reworking technique on the eastern edge, where did that come from?" Hermione pushed a strand of hair back from her face. "I don't know. I was thinking about the fabric having an original shape, the way paper has a grain or fabric has a weave, and it seemed like if I could find the underlying structure it would want to return to that shape if given the chance. So she paused, suggested it. You suggested a dimensional fabric back into coherence," Strange said flatly. "Is that not?" She hesitated. "That's not a standard technique." Strange looked at her for a long moment with an expression that Harry was starting to recognize as his version of being genuinely caught off guard. "No," he said, "it is not a standard technique. What you just did has a name, which is dimensional reconstitution, and it is a master-level practice that most sorcerers don't attempt for the first decade of their training, because it requires a quality of attunement that takes most people years to develop." He looked at the space where the breach had been, then back at her. "You've been training for 8 days. Hermione seemed to not know what to do with this information. She looked at Harry. Harry looked back at her. "She does that," he said to Strange. "It's been happening since we were 11. You get used to it." They got back to the sanctum as the New York morning was properly beginning, the city in full voice, sunlight coming hard off the glass towers and turning the streets to corridors of gold. Strange went through the portal first and didn't say anything else in the immediate aftermath of the Kolkata Square, which Harry had come to understand was not disapproval but processing, the particular silence of a man who was reconsidering several things at once. They ate breakfast. Strange drank 2 cups of coffee, which Harry had not seen him do before. Hermione ate a bowl of something and wrote 6 pages of notes without stopping, her spoon going back and forth mechanically while her pen ran across the parchment. Then Strange sat back in his chair and looked at them both across the breakfast table and said, "What did you learn?" Harry had been waiting for this. He'd been turning it over since they'd stepped out of the portal. "The fabric isn't uniform," he said. Kolkata felt different to here, older, more layered. "That changes how you work with it. You can't apply the same pressure everywhere. You have to read the local character first." Strange nodded. "Yes, what else?" "The creature." Harry thought about it carefully. "It was negotiating, not attacking. It only started what you could call a fight because we weren't going to negotiate, which means these things have logic. They have something like strategy. They're not just monsters." "Never just monsters," Strange said. "Go on." "Herding worked," Harry said, "because it had a model of the space that included the breach as home base, and when I started cutting off routes to that home base it recalculated instead of just charging. That's actually useful information for how to deal with territorial incursion creatures as a category." Strange said nothing, but something in his posture shifted, a fractional adjustment that Harry was learning to read as the equivalent of someone else saying, "Excellent point." "Hermione." Strange said. Hermione looked up from her notes. "The breach structure was deliberate," she said. "Not the original breach that might have been opportunistic, but the widening was deliberate. Something on the other side was trying to create a stable aperture, not a temporary incursion, something that could be used repeatedly." She held Strange's eyes. "That's not standard territorial behavior, is it?" Strange set down his coffee cup very carefully. "No," he said, "it is not." "So someone sent it," Harry said, "or something arranged it," Strange said. "There are entities in the mid-dimensional layer that farm breaches for access to resource-rich dimensions. Earth is extremely resource-rich from their perspective. The density of intentional magic use here is unusual." A pause. "It may be nothing more than that, an opportunistic setup." "But," Harry said. Strange looked at him. "The breach location was specific. Kumartuli is one of the oldest districts in Kolkata, artisan quarter, centuries of craft and intentional creation. That density of human creative intent generates a specific type of dimensional energy that." He stopped, picked up his coffee cup again, seemed to decide something. I need to check some things, he said, before I speculate further. Both of you rest this afternoon, real rest. What you did this morning was not a drill, and your dimensional signatures are running hot. Give them time to settle. I'm fine, Harry said. Strange looked at him with an expression that was not unkind but was extremely firm. Your dimensional signature is running at a level I'd expect from someone who'd been doing this for 6 months. You are not fine, you are running on adrenaline and magical momentum, and if you push it without recovery you will have a significantly worse morning tomorrow than you had today. He stood up. Rest. Harry opened his mouth. Mr. Potter. He closed it. Thank you, Strange said, and left the room. Harry didn't rest. He went upstairs, changed, came back downstairs and went to the roof. The sanctum had a roof garden that Harry had found on day 3 and not told Strange about, partly because he wasn't sure whether he was supposed to be up there, and partly because it was the only place in the building that felt anything like open sky. It had terracotta pots and a low railing, and beyond it the Manhattan skyline did what it always did, which was exist at a scale designed to make individual humans feel appropriately irrelevant. Harry had found that he didn't mind this. There was something almost restful about being somewhere that didn't need anything from him. He sat with his back against the railing and his eyes on the sky and thought. He thought about the creature, not the fight, but the part before the fight, the part where Strange had said it was negotiating. He thought about Voldemort and how he never thought of Voldemort as something that could be negotiated with, and how long he'd been thinking of it as a war you win by surviving, and whether that was actually a strategy or just the absence of one. He thought about the Horcrux, which he did now with more clarity than he'd managed before. Strange had named it, had described it in dimensional terms that made it real in a way that sitting in the Dursleys' kitchen being afraid of it had never achieved. It was a piece of a fractured soul, occupying the dimensional interface between Harry's magic and the fabric of reality, and his magic had been containing it instinctively for years. That was not helplessness. That was power he hadn't known he had. He sat there for about 40 minutes thinking, and then the roof door opened and Hermione came through it carrying 2 mugs of tea, which she'd clearly made herself rather than waiting for the sanctum to produce them, which told him she was feeling the same way about sitting still that he was. She handed him a mug and sat beside him against the railing. He said rest, she noted. He did, Harry said. I'm not resting either. I know. They drank tea in companionable silence for a while. Below, New York did its thing. The reconstitution thing, Harry said eventually. Hermione looked at her mug. I know. That was Hermione, that was something. I know what Strange said. Do you? Because you did that thing you do when someone tells you you've done something exceptional, where you immediately start finding reasons why it wasn't that significant. She was quiet for a moment. It wasn't intentional. I wasn't applying a known technique. The right thing was obvious. That's kind of the point, Harry said. You're getting to the place where the right thing is obvious. Isn't that what he's been telling us to do? Stop thinking about the road and feel the engine. Hermione turned her mug in her hands. The morning light hit the side of her face and she looked not younger exactly, but cleaner somehow, the way people look when they're not performing their usual version of themselves. I've spent 7 years at Hogwarts knowing that I'm good at magic, she said. Really good. Spent most of that time being slightly embarrassed about it, because it made things complicated, because people either resented it or expected me to solve everything with it. She paused. Strange doesn't seem to find it complicated at all. Strange finds it useful, Harry said, which is different. Yes, she looked sideways at him. He finds you useful too. He doesn't say so. He never says so, Harry agreed. But he sent us to Kolkata instead of going himself. That means something? Harry thought about it. Yeah, he said, it does. They went back inside eventually and Harry slept for 2 hours without dreaming, which was unusual enough that he noticed it when he woke up. The Horcrux was quiet. His scar didn't itch. He lay in the afternoon light with the window making a golden square on the ceiling and felt, for the first time in as long as he could remember, something close to equilibrium. That evening, Strange called them back to the octagonal room. He had the slate behind him covered in notes, not diagrams this time, text, dense and specific, written in a hand that was precise and small and suggested someone who had been thinking very fast. He was standing in front of it with his arms folded and he looked, Harry thought, like a man who had checked things and found them not entirely as he'd hoped. The Cumaculi incursion, Strange said. I've traced its origin. The breach was opened from the mid-dimensional layer using a specific type of anchor spell that doesn't originate in the mystic arts tradition. He paused. It's wizarding in origin, dark wizarding. Silence. Someone on Voldemort's side opened the breach, Hermione said. Someone with knowledge of both dark wizarding practice and enough awareness of dimensional structure to direct an incursion to a specific location, Strange said. That's a narrow category of practitioner. It requires cross-disciplinary knowledge that is extremely rare. How rare? Harry asked. There is one active dark wizard I'm aware of who has that breadth of knowledge, Strange said. His name is Barnabas Finch. He was expelled from the European Sorcerers Network about 15 years ago for attempting to sell mystic arts techniques to the highest bidder. He disappeared after that. Strange looked at Harry steadily. He may have found his highest bidder. Harry felt something settle into place in his thinking. A piece he hadn't known was missing, now present. Voldemort's been looking for ways into Strange's world, he said. Into the dimensional layer, Strange said. Yes, the Horcrux network, his Horcruxes, they're already dimensional anchors. A dark wizard who understood how to connect that network to mid-dimensional space would have, Strange stopped, would have very significant capabilities, both in terms of detection and concealment. He'd know when someone was using the mystic arts near him, Hermione said slowly. He'd feel it in the same fabric, like our attunement, but for dark purposes, and he could conceal his own magical operations from dimensional detection, Strange said. Which means that the Horcrux hunting you have to do, he looked at Harry, and the look was direct and unsentimental and also, Harry thought, respectful in a specific way, becomes significantly more complicated if Voldemort has that capability. Because the Horcruxes are dimensional objects, finding them through dimensional means, which was the cleanest approach, becomes a traceable action. So he'd know when we were getting close, Harry said. Potentially, yes, and we'd know he knows. Strange tilted his head. If your attunement is good enough, possibly. The Darkhold fragment changes this calculation as well if the transaction I was tracking completed. He looked at the slate behind him. I still don't know if it did. How do we find out? Hermione asked. Carefully, Strange said. He turned to the slate and made a note. I need to make contact with a source inside the European Dark Wizard Network. That takes time. He turned back. In the meantime, you continue training. Tomorrow we move to active dimensional combat techniques, not theory, practice. Harry felt something shift in the room, not tension, more like the raising of stakes, clean and clear, the kind of shift that comes when a game stops being a game. The Kolkata incursion was a test, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Strange looked at him. You said it was a straightforward problem. The things we ran into were not simple. You knew they wouldn't be, and you sent us anyway because you needed to see what we'd do with something we weren't prepared for. Harry held Strange's eyes. Am I wrong? Strange was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. No, he said. You're not wrong. Harry nodded. He felt no particular anger about it that surprised him slightly. Maybe it would have made him angry a year ago. But a year ago he would have been right to be angry because a year ago he hadn't known what he was doing and putting him in unprepared danger was just danger. Now it was different. He'd known he could handle it. Strange had known he could handle it. The test was information for both of them. What did you learn? He asked Strange. The same question Strange had asked them. Strange almost smiled. It got further this time, just barely past the corner of his mouth. That your instincts in live situations are better than most sorcerers I've trained, that Granger's technical development is running at a pace I need to revise my timeline around, and that you work better together than separately, which is not always the case with strong practitioners. The ego management alone usually takes months. He looked between them, and that the Horcrux is stable under pressure. I was monitoring it throughout. Harry went still. You were monitoring, Strange said. Not interfering. It didn't destabilize under the dimensional pressure of the fight. Which means your containment of it, the instinctive isolation you've been doing for years, is more robust than I initially estimated. He put both hands flat on the table, which is relevant to the conversation we're going to have very soon about what we do about it. When is very soon? Hermione said. When you're ready to hear the answer, Strange said, and I'm ready to say it. Picked up the chalk and began writing on the slate. Today it's combat technique. Sit down. They sat. Outside, the evening was coming in off the Hudson River, and the city was changing gears with all its enormous, purposeful noise. In a room full of impossible things, under the attention of a building that had existed since the 12th century and had opinions about nearly everything, 2 people who had spent their lives improvising began, with careful, deliberate, irreversible intention, to stop. But in Wiltshire, the candles were lit. Lucius Malfoy did not meet with people he considered beneath him in the main rooms of the manor. He met with them in the library, which served the double function of communicating his superior access to information and providing him with something to look at other than the face of whoever he was entertaining. Tonight's guest was a man named Caro, not the Caro with the sister, a different one, a third cousin who had made himself useful in specific and not particularly genteel ways over the years. He smelled faintly of something chemical. He had the look of a man who spent time in places where no one would look for him, which was the look Lucius valued in a tool. Finch, Lucius said without preamble. We've lost contact, Caro said. His voice was rough, habitually low. Since the Kolkata operation, he's not responding. Lucius was quiet for a moment. He looked at the fire. Finch had been the most expensive part of this particular arrangement, not in galleons, in information, and information was always the more precious currency. If Finch was gone, certain planned capabilities went with him. The operation, Lucius said, did it accomplish what it was meant to accomplish? Unknown, sir. We know the incursion opened. Oh, it held for approximately. Did someone close it? A pause. Yes, sir, before the breach could stabilize for repeated use. Closed cleanly. Another pause. Not by anyone we can identify. The dimensional signature is unfamiliar. More than one practitioner. Lucius thought about the letter he'd burned 3 weeks ago that described a dimensional specialist training the Potter boy. He thought about unfamiliar dimensional signatures. He thought about timelines. How cleanly, he said. Very, Caro said with the specific discomfort of someone delivering news they know the recipient won't enjoy. The breach was reconstituted, not just closed. The underlying structure was restored. That's not, he hesitated, that's not a common capability. Lucius looked at him for a long moment. "No," he said, "it isn't." He stood, moved to the fire, put his hands behind his back. He thought about the Dark Lord, who expected to be told things at specific times in specific ways with specific context that made the telling feel like an offering rather than a report. The Dark Lord was not, despite reputation, an unreasonable man if the information was well framed. He was, however, entirely unreasonable about being surprised. Lucius could not let the Dark Lord be surprised. "Tell me," Lucius said to the fire, "about the dimensional signature." Everything Finch recorded before he went silent. Caro told him. Lucius listened. By the end of it, he had begun to understand the shape of what was happening, and the shape was concerning, not frightening. Lucius Malfoy had been in situations that justified fear many times, and he had learned to manage it below the surface, where it lived as information rather than noise. What he felt now was the specific sharpening of attention that came when a situation revealed itself to be more significant than its surface suggested. The Potter boy was not simply hiding at a relative's house this summer. The Potter boy was being trained by someone who could reconstitute dimensional fabric, someone who worked with a partner, possibly two partners of significant and unusual capability. The Dark Lord needed to know this, immediately. But how Lucius told him, that was everything. How you shaped information determined how the recipient shaped their response, and the Dark Lord's response to Potter is being trained in ways we don't understand by someone we can't identify could take many forms, several of which would not serve Lucius's interests. He needed more information first. He needed to understand what exactly was being built, and for that he needed a closer look than Caro's burned reports could provide. "One more thing," Lucius said. "The transaction, the Darkhold fragment. Completed, sir. Our contact confirmed delivery. The fragment is—" Caro paused, choosing his words, "in possession of the correct party." Lucius turned from the fire. He looked at Caro with an expression that gave away exactly nothing. "Good," he said. "You may go." After Caro left, Lucius stood alone in the library for a long time. The fire burned down to coals. The books stood in their ranked and silent rows, keeping their own counsel. He thought about the word reconstituted. He thought about what that meant in the right hands, applied not to a dimensional breach in Kolkata but to something closer to home, applied to Horcruxes, applied to the architecture of the Dark Lord's immortality, which was dimensional in nature, which a sufficiently attuned practitioner could, in theory. He sat down very carefully in his chair. He picked up his quill, held it over blank parchment, put it down. Some pieces of information needed to be delivered in person. He called for his cloak. Chapter 4. What the Scar remembers. The combat training started the morning after Kolkata, and it was nothing like Harry expected. He'd expected something physical: drills, applications, the dimensional equivalent of spell practice in the DA. What Strange gave them instead was a room with no furniture, a smooth stone floor, and instructions to stand 6 feet apart and try to displace each other. "Displacement," Strange said, standing at the room's edge with his arms folded. "Not attack, not defense. You are not trying to hurt each other. You are trying to move each other using the fabric as medium, the same principle as Kolkata reduced to its essentials." Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked back at him with an expression of wary scientific interest. "We can use our wands," Harry said. "If you want them," Strange said. "I'm not going to stop you, but think about what you're actually trying to do and whether the wand is the most efficient tool for it." Harry thought about it. He put the wand in his back pocket. Hermione left hers in her bag without saying anything, which Harry interpreted as her having already reached the same conclusion. "Go," Strange said. They spent 20 minutes getting absolutely nowhere, and then Hermione shifted her attunement slightly and found the dimensional signature directly under Harry's feet and pushed. And Harry moved sideways 3 feet without meaning to, stumbled, caught himself on the wall. He stood there for a second, feeling the echo of what she'd done, not forceful, not aggressive, more like someone had briefly changed what the floor believed about itself. He grinned. He couldn't help it. "That's it," Strange said quietly. Harry found Hermione's signature in the fabric. She was attuned deeply enough that her presence in it had a distinct quality, precise and structured, like a very clean note in a chord, and he reached for the space behind her rather than the space under her, the way he'd instinctively reached in Kolkata, and he pulled it toward him. Not her, the space. A brick behind her shifted, and she stepped forward involuntarily 2 steps and pulled herself up short with a visible effort. "That's different from mine," she said, not accusatory, but noting it with that observational quality she applied to everything. "Mine was vertical pressure, yours was horizontal pull. Your instinct is architectural," Strange said to her. "His is gravitational, both valid, both useful for different things. Know which one you're doing and why." He unfolded his arms. Again, they went again, and again. By mid-morning they were managing consistent displacements, and by early afternoon something had shifted in how they were doing it, less deliberate, less mechanical, more the way you breathe than the way you think about breathing. Harry found himself anticipating Hermione's moves not by watching her, but by feeling her intent in the fabric half a second before she committed to it. And he was moving to compensate before the displacement happened, and Hermione was doing the same to him, and what had started as a training exercise had become something faster and more interesting, a conversation in dimensional pressure with no words in it, each move read and countered and built upon. Strange watched all of this without interrupting. At one point, Harry tried something new, not a displacement but a fold, the same move he'd used on the creature in Kolkata, aimed at the air in front of Hermione rather than under her feet. The fold caught the edge of her own reach mid-motion, and the interaction between the two produced something neither of them had intended, a brief, brilliant flare of golden light in the space between them that lasted half a second and felt in the fabric like a chord resolving. Both of them stopped. Strange walked to the center of the room and looked at the air where the flare had been with the expression he got when something had surprised him past the point where he could conceal it. He stood there for a moment. "Do that again," he said. "I don't know what I did," Harry said honestly. "That's all right." Strange looked at Hermione. "What did you feel?" "His fold caught the edge of my reach," she said. "My reach was structured. I was trying to build a precise architecture, and when his fold caught it, the two combined. The structure met the motion and she searched for the word, resonated. Harmonic displacement," Strange said quietly, half to himself. He looked at both of them with something that wasn't quite calculation and wasn't quite wonder, somewhere between the two. "That's a technique it took my master and me 3 years to achieve. You did it on day 9 because you were paying attention to each other and not trying to do it." He turned and walked back to the room's edge. "Don't try to recreate it. When it comes back, let it now again from the beginning." Harry met Hermione's eyes. She gave him a tiny raise of her eyebrows that meant 3 years, and he gave her one back that meant I know. Then they both faced forward and got back to work. 3 days after Kolkata, Strange came to breakfast with a different quality of silence around him. Not the thoughtful kind, the kind that meant he'd received information and was deciding what to do with it. Harry noticed immediately. So did Hermione, from the way she set her book face down. Strange sat, drank half his coffee and said, "I have a contact. Name's Wang. He runs the archive at the Kamatage facility in Nepal. He confirmed last night that the Darkhold fragment transaction completed approximately 2 weeks ago." He set the cup down. "Which means Voldemort's people have had it for 2 weeks. Have they used it?" Hermione asked. "Wang can't confirm use. The Darkhold leaves no dimensional signature, as you know. That's what makes it specifically dangerous. What he can confirm is that the fragment was purchased by a known Death Eater intermediary operating through a dark wizard contact named Finch." Strange looked at Harry. "Barnabas Finch, the one who opened the Kolkata breach," Harry said. "The same, which connects what happened in Kolkata to Voldemort's organization directly and suggests that the Cumaculi incursion wasn't just resource farming, it was capability testing." Strange folded his hands. "Which was demonstrating to potential buyers that he could open dimensional breaches at will, direct them to specific locations, and use them to introduce dimensional entities to high magic areas as a destabilization technique." A pause. "He was showing them what they were buying. And now they have it," Hermione said. "And now they have Finch, presumably, or had him before Kolkata went wrong, and they have the fragment, and someone in Voldemort's inner circle has had 2 weeks to work with it." Strange picked up his coffee cup again. "There's one more thing." He said it with the specific cadence of saving the most significant piece for the right moment, and Harry felt the Horcrux stir faintly, which had been happening with increasing frequency when the conversation touched on Voldemort. "The fragment is a page from the Darkhold," Strange said. "One page. Based on what one could identify from the transaction description, it's the page dealing with what Ch. Thon called Dominion, the ability to extend a practitioner's awareness into dimensional space in a way that bypasses normal attunement. It gives passive dimensional perception. No signature, no trace." He looked at Harry carefully. "What that means for you specifically is that if someone in Voldemort's inner circle has successfully activated that page, they may now be able to perceive dimensional activity, including sling ring work, including the kind of attunement practice we've been doing, without generating any detectable signal themselves." The room was very quiet. "They've been watching," Harry said, not a question, just a fact slotting into place. "Possibly," Strange said. "I've been operating on that assumption since last night. I've run a dimensional screen over the sanctum that should block external perception. It's expensive to maintain but effective. As of this morning, we are dimensionally dark to outside observation, but everything before this morning," Hermione said carefully, "is visible to whoever activated the Darkhold page," Strange said, "if they did. If the activation worked, Darkhold techniques are not reliably controllable even for skilled practitioners. Ch. Thon's writing is intentionally obfuscating. The page may have been unusable, may still be unusable." He tilted his head. "I don't know. I'm operating on the assumption that it worked because the alternative assumption that we're unobserved creates a dangerous complacency." Harry drank his tea, let the information settle. The Horcrux stirred again, and he pressed his awareness toward it the way Strange had shown him, not suppressing it, just noting it, the way you note a sound in a quiet house. "You're there, I see you, stay still." It stilled. "There's something you should know," he said, "about the Horcrux." Strange looked at him with complete attention. "It's been reacting more," Harry said. "In training, in Kolkata, whenever we talk about Voldemort, it moves like something waking up." He looked at Strange steadily. "I've been managing it the way you showed me, but it's been moving more than it did when we arrived." Strange was quiet for a moment. Describe moving, what does it feel like specifically? Harry thought about how to describe it accurately, like something heavy shifting in a container, like it's trying to orient towards something. When I talk about Voldemort or we're doing high-intensity work, it shifts toward. He touched his forehead without thinking about it. This direction. North, Strange said. Harry blinked. What? Every time you've described it orienting, we've been in sessions where true north from this building points roughly toward the UK. Strange stood up and moved to the slate, picked up the chalk, drew a quick compass diagram. A Horcrux maintains a dimensional connection to its master. The soul fragment wants to be near the hole. That's what it's doing when it shifts. It's trying to find Voldemort, orienting toward him. He put the chalk down, which is useful. It's useful, Harry repeated. It's a compass, Hermione said suddenly, sitting up straight. Harry's scar is a compass to Voldemort. Has been this whole time, Strange said. The visions, the pain, the empathic connection, all of it is the Horcrux maintaining its orientation toward its master. The reason it's getting more active is that the training has strengthened Harry's overall dimensional engagement, and the Horcrux is using that energy. It has more to work with than it did at Privet Drive. He looked at Harry, which is why the conversation about what we do about it can't wait much longer. Harry felt something happen in his chest, not fear exactly, something more like the feeling before a very high dive. The commitment point, the moment before which you can still go back. He looked at Strange and didn't look away. Tell me. Strange sat down. He looked at both of them for a moment and then he said, the soul fragment cannot be removed non-destructively. Anyone who tells you otherwise is either wrong or lying. The Horcrux and the host are dimensionally integrated at the core interface, the place we've been working with for 11 days. Removing it surgically would be like removing someone's center of gravity. You can't. A pause. However. There's a however, Harry said. There is always a however, Strange said. The fragment is contained. We've established that your instinctive isolation has been running for years and it's robust. The question isn't can we remove it, it's can we neutralize it, make it inert, dead for practical purposes without destroying the host. Is that possible? Hermione asked. In theory, Strange said. The process requires extremely precise dimensional surgery, working at the interface level to separate the Horcrux energy from the host's magical center without collapsing either one. It would require the practitioner to work from inside the dimensional interface itself, which is, he paused, not a comfortable experience. Would it work? Harry said. Strange met his eyes. I believe so. I am not certain. I've never done it because no one has ever had this specific problem before. He let that land, and there's a risk. Of course there is, Harry said without bitterness. The Horcrux during the procedure would be essentially active, Strange said, wakened fully. Trying to resist, a piece of Voldemort's soul fully present and hostile inside your dimensional interface. He held Harry's eyes. I need to know that you can hold against that, not physically, mentally, dimensionally. The attunement you've built is the thing that would protect you. Your relationship with your own magical center, the strength of that connection, is the variable that determines whether the procedure is survivable. Silence. Not the empty kind, the full kind, that happens when something important has been said and is being absorbed. Hermione spoke first. He's not ready yet, she said, not with emotion, with the specific quality of her most accurate assessments, the ones that came before feeling rather than after. He's good, he's extraordinary, what he's doing in 11 days is extraordinary, but the attunement isn't deep enough yet to hold against a fully wakened soul fragment. A month, she said to Strange, maybe less. Strange nodded slowly. That was my assessment as well. Harry looked at Hermione. You could have let me be the one to decide that. She looked back at him. Could I, or would you have said you were ready because you don't like waiting? Harry opened his mouth, closed it. A month, Strange said again, settling the point. We use the time to deepen the attunement and to identify and neutralize the other Horcruxes, which removes Voldemort's redundancy and means that by the time we deal with yours, he met Harry's eyes, it's the last one. We know some of them, Harry said. The diary was already destroyed. Dobby, a house elf, helped. It's complicated. The locket, the cup, something at Hogwarts, we think. And Nagini, his snake. Strange wrote this on the slate. Finding them through dimensional means is now complicated by the possibility of Darkhold observation. We need a different approach. He looked at Hermione. Your reconstitution work in Kolkata, can you apply it in reverse, not restoring dimensional fabric but reading the damage that's been done to it by a Horcrux's presence? Objects of that kind leave marks on the medium around them. Hermione thought about it visibly, her gaze going to the middle distance. Like footprints, she said slowly. The Horcrux moves through the fabric differently because it's a dimensional object that doesn't belong in this layer. It would leave traces of structural stress in the fabric around it, which you can read, Strange said. I think so. I'd need to practice. The signature would be subtle and I've only felt the Horcrux through Harry, never independently. She stopped. I've only felt it through Harry, she said again, differently, and looked at Harry with an expression that was apologetic in advance. I'm going to need to feel it independently. Harry understood what she meant. You need to attune to my scar, to the Horcrux through your scar, yes. Get a clean reading of what a Horcrux's dimensional signature actually feels like, so I can go looking for the same signature in other places. She looked slightly uncomfortable about it in a way that was not about the magic, and entirely about asking him to let her that close to something that hurt. It's not I'd only need to, Hermione, Harry said. It's fine. Strange was already moving to the work table. Tonight, he said, eat something first. The reading will be precise work and you'll want full concentration. The afternoon slid past in the specific way that intense days did, fast in the doing, long in the reflection. They trained in the displacement room until Strange was satisfied, and satisfaction from Strange meant he'd stopped commenting and started watching with both hands in his pockets, which Harry had come to recognize as his version of applause. The harmonic displacement came back twice. Each time it happened, it was slightly different. The first time a controlled burst of light, the second time it manifested as a fold that moved faster than either of them had intended and hit the far wall with a crack that left a scorch mark on the stone. Strange looked at the scorch mark for a long moment. We're doing that wrong, Hermione said immediately, concerned. You're doing it fast, Strange said. There's a difference. I'd rather you manage the speed than lose the instinct that's driving it. He looked at Harry. What are you feeling when it happens? Harry thought about it. Like, he tried to find an honest description, like she's already where I'm going, like the reach is somewhere to go before I've decided where that is. Strange looked at Hermione. And from your side, similar, she said, like his motion is already completing mine, where she stopped, slightly self-conscious about the word she'd arrived at. Coherent, Strange supplied. She looked at him. Yes, is that a specific term? Dimensional coherence, Strange said. When two practitioners develop enough shared attunement that their work in the fabric stops interfering with each other and starts completing each other. It's uncommon, it requires trust, which is why most partnerships take years to achieve it. He looked at them both with the expression that was either respect or something more complex. You two have been building it since you were 11, you just didn't have a framework for it before. Harry thought about that, about the years of running through Hogwarts corridors and ducking bludgers, and arguing in the library and standing in the Department of Mysteries, and every single moment in between, and the specific way that knowing Hermione thought differently from him had always been an asset rather than a complication. Does it affect how we should train? Hermione asked, practical as always. It means some techniques I was going to introduce sequentially can be introduced together, Strange said. We'll adjust. He turned toward the door. One more thing while I have you both, I've arranged a contact meeting for tomorrow morning, a source inside the European Dark Wizard Intelligence Network. He said it neutrally, but Harry felt the Sanctum's attention sharpen slightly around the words the way it sometimes did when something significant was happening. Who? Harry asked. Someone who was in Voldemort's outer circle before the First War and has been selling information about his current operations to multiple parties since the Second War started. He's reliable, self-interested, and somewhat frightened, which makes him accurate. Strange looked at Harry. He specifically requested to meet you. I don't know why yet. We'll find out tomorrow. Where's the meeting? Hermione asked. Prague, Strange said, as if this were unremarkable. We leave at 7. He went through the door. Harry and Hermione looked at each other. Prague, Harry said. I've always wanted to go, Hermione said, and went back to her book. The attunement reading happened after dinner in the octagonal room, with the evening settled dark outside the windows and the sanctum holding its particular quality of careful, observant quiet. Strange arranged 3 chairs in a loose triangle, himself at one point, Harry and Hermione at the other 2, and put the worktable's instruments away, leaving the surface clear. The arrangement felt deliberate in a way that went beyond practicality, like a setting that acknowledged what was about to happen required something. Ground rules, Strange said. Miss Granger, you're reading, not pulling. The distinction is significant. You're not trying to extract the Horcrux or affect it in any way. You're looking. If you feel it push back toward you, you withdraw immediately. Clear, clear, Hermione said. Potter, you maintain awareness of your own center throughout, the presence in the interface, not the Horcrux itself, your own center. If you feel the fragment start to activate, shift toward consciousness rather than the passive orientation it does normally, you tell me immediately. Understood, Harry said. And if at any point either of you feels wrong about it, we stop. Strange's voice was matter-of-fact about this, not dramatic, just establishing parameters. No performance, no pushing through discomfort to prove something. He looked at Harry specifically when he said that last part. I know, Harry said. I've actually been getting better at that. Strange tilted his head in acknowledgement. I know, ready. Harry felt his heart rate settle, not slow but steady, the pre-fight equilibrium he'd been developing since the displacement training began. He found his center the way he found it every morning now, the warm presence underneath, the thing that breathed in time with him. Found the Horcrux in its usual place in the interface, heavy, quiet, oriented north. He looked at Hermione. Ready. She closed her eyes, put her hands loosely in her lap. He watched her go into attunement the way he'd watched it every day for nearly 2 weeks, the particular settling of her expression, the way she went from thinking Hermione to something more still and more fundamental. Then she reached. Harry felt it, felt her reach touch the edge of his dimensional interface, and it felt completely different from the displacement training, from the combat work. This was not a push or a pull, it was more like presence. The specific quality of Hermione's attunement, precise and structured, and carrying a warmth that he suspected she'd be mortified to know he could feel, moving into his dimensional space and looking. He stayed still, let her look. She found the Horcrux. He knew the moment she did because she went very still, a different kind of still from her usual attunement stillness, and her brow furrowed slightly, and he felt the Horcrux register her attention. Not activate, not push back, but notice, the way you notice when someone enters a room even if you're not looking at them. She stayed for perhaps 40 seconds, then she withdrew steadily and deliberately and opened her eyes. She looked at Harry for a moment without saying anything, then she looked at Strange. "It's cold," she said, not describing temperature. "The signature is it's like ice in the fabric. Everything around it is warm, ambient, alive. The Horcrux is a cold spot. Dimensional fabric around it is stressed like the fabric around the Kolkata breach, but slower, more chronic." She paused. "And it's angry." "Angry," Strange said. "It has, I don't want to say a feeling because that dignifies it too much, but it has an orientation. It isn't just a passive fragment." She looked at Harry and something moved in her expression, something she smoothed back immediately, but not before Harry saw it. "It knows where it is," she said. "It knows it's contained. It's been aware of being contained for a long time." "It doesn't change anything," Harry said firmly, calmly, the way Strange said things. "No," Strange said, "it doesn't, but Hermione's read is accurate and gives us the signature we need." He looked at her. "You can find that in other objects now. Feel for the cold spot in the ambient fabric." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I know exactly what I'm looking for." She paused. "There's something else. The cold, it's not uniform. It has a directional quality. It's not just orienting toward Voldemort like the compass Harry described. She frowned, it's pulling like it's trying to complete a circuit." Strange leaned forward slightly, just slightly. "The Horcrux network," he said quietly. "The soul fragments maintain a dimensional connection to each other as well as to their origin. If you can feel that pull, then I can follow it," Hermione said. "To the other Horcruxes," Harry said. Strange sat back. He looked at the ceiling briefly in the way he sometimes did when he was revising multiple calculations simultaneously. Then he looked at them and said, "That changes the timeline significantly. That means we can locate the remaining Horcruxes through dimensional reading rather than physical search, faster, cleaner, and if we maintain the dimensional screen on your signatures." "Undetectable," Harry said. "Undetectable," Strange confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. "Tomorrow, Prague first. When we return, we start the Horcrux mapping." He stood up, moved toward the door, and then stopped. He turned back. He looked at Harry with an expression that was stripped of the professional assessment and said, "How are you doing? Not the Horcrux, not the training, you." Harry blinked. I'm all right." Hermione's read confirmed that the fragment has been aware and contained for years," Strange said. "I want to make sure you heard that, not the contained part, the aware part. That's not a comfortable piece of information." Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about all the years of the scar burning and the dreams and the terrible intimacy of having Voldemort's anger moving through his mind, and he thought about what it meant for all of that to have been two-directional, that the fragment in him had known where it was, had been pressing against its containment, had been in some sense experiencing him from the inside, and he'd never known. "It doesn't change anything," he said again, but this time it was slightly different, not a dismissal but a choice, deciding that it didn't change anything rather than asserting that it couldn't. Strange held his eyes for a moment. "No," he said, "it doesn't." And there was something in the way he said it, like someone who has also had to choose more than once, that a difficult thing doesn't change the necessary thing. That was more comfort than anything warmer would have been. He went through the door. Harry and Hermione sat in the quiet room for a while. The sanctum breathed around them, old and attentive. "I'm sorry," Hermione said eventually, "about what I felt." "Don't be," Harry said. "You needed to know it. We both needed to know it." He looked at the ceiling. "I think I've always known, actually, not consciously, but somewhere." He glanced at her. "Is that mad?" "No," she said very quietly. "I think that's just what it's like to carry something that heavy for that long. Stop noticing the weight, but the shape of you changes around it." Harry looked at her. She looked slightly surprised at herself, as if the sentence had arrived before she'd edited it. She straightened her spine in the way she did when she'd been accidentally personal. "That was probably—" "No," Harry said. "That was right." Prague at 7 in the morning was stone and gold, and October cold even in late summer, the Charles Bridge holding its gauntlet of stone saints against a sky the color of old pewter. Strange opened the portal to an alley near the bridge's east entrance, and they came through into air that tasted different from New York, older and damper and less aggressively purposeful. The contact was waiting in a cafe 2 streets from the bridge, a man in his 50s, compact and neatly dressed, who had the look of someone who had been nervous for so long it had become his resting state. He had quick eyes and a coffee he'd been turning in his hands rather than drinking. When Strange came through the door, he stood automatically. When he saw Harry, he went very still. Harry had been assessed by people his whole life, by Dumbledore, by Voldemort, by every Death Eater who'd looked at his scar and seen the thing they feared or the thing they'd been sent to kill. This man looked at him differently, with something closer to grief than fear and considerably more complicated than either. They sat. The cafe was nearly empty, check murmur of radio, and the smell of good coffee and the particular privacy of a room where no one is pretending not to eavesdrop because no one is interested in eavesdropping. "Antonin Grave," Strange said. "Harry Potter, you said you wanted to meet him." "I did," Grave said. His voice was Eastern European, English learned formally. He looked at Harry. "You look like your father." Harry waited. "I was at school with James Potter," Grave said. "Durmstrang, not Hogwarts. We met at an international conference in our 6th year. He stopped. He was a good man. I was not by then on a path toward good choices, but he was kind to me regardless, and that stayed with me. He put his coffee cup down. What I am about to tell you, I am telling you because of that memory, not for any payment Strange has offered, which I will still accept, but the motivation is this. Understood, Harry said. Grav looked at Strange briefly, then back at Harry. Lucius Malfoy came to a private meeting 12 days ago with a man named Rookwood. You know the name. He was in the ministry, Harry said. Unspeakable, he's a Death Eater. He was recently promoted, Grav said, within that organization. The promotion relates to his specific expertise, dimensional theory, which he developed during his time in the Department of Mysteries. Malfoy brought him to a meeting with a third party, a broker who operates between the dark wizarding world and certain non-conventional practitioners. He paused. The meeting was about you, Mr. Potter, specifically about a dimensional specialist who has been observed training you. Harry felt Strange go still beside him with that particular quality of stillness that wasn't relaxation. They know I'm here, Harry said. They knew within days of your arrival, Grav said. Before the dimensional screen Strange put up, the Darkhold fragment, the page Malfoy's people acquired, it gave passive perception to whoever activated it. Rookwood activated it. He met Harry's eyes. He has been watching the Sanctum Sanctorum for 2 weeks. Not anymore, Strange said. No, he lost the signal when you screened it, which disturbed him considerably. A Darkhold technique being blocked implies a specific level of dimensional capability that they were not expecting. Grav turned his coffee cup again. What I'm telling you now is what their response to losing the signal has been. He reached inside his coat and produced a small photograph, wizard photograph, moving, which Strange looked at with mild interest. It showed a room Harry didn't recognize: stone walls, candles, 3 figures in conversation. Even at the photograph scale, the white blonde hair of one figure was unmistakable. Malfoy is arranging a direct approach, Grav said. Not an attack on the sanctum. Rookwood advised against it. The structural protection on that building is, he called it, geological, which I understood to mean very old and very substantial. A small, tight, almost smile. Instead, they are planning an approach through Hogwarts. Hogwarts, Hermione said sharply. The castle has its own dimensional properties, Grav said. Very old, extremely layered. Rookwood's analysis, and this is what you need to understand, is that a practitioner of the dimensional arts who has recently been at Hogwarts, who has a deep attunement to it, who can feel it through the fabric. He looked at Hermione. Hermione went absolutely still. He's going to use Hogwarts as a lure, Harry said. The shape of it assembled itself with a cold, clear efficiency in his thinking. He knows Hermione is attuned to it. She opened a portal to the library if they were watching. They saw the portal, Grav confirmed. The library, yes. Rookwood's plan is to introduce a dimensional disturbance into Hogwarts significant enough that any attuned practitioner connected to the castle would feel it. The disturbance would draw her attention and potentially her attempt to locate or resolve it, and when she opens a portal toward Hogwarts, they trace it back, Strange said. Voice was extremely controlled. The portal origin is visible from the destination end if you know what you're looking for and you're using the Darkhold perception. Yes, Grav said. They trace the origin. They find the sanctum's location with precision despite the screen, because the screen blocks passive perception but can't block an active trace on a portal she opens. He looked at Hermione with the expression of a man delivering genuinely unpleasant news to someone who didn't deserve it. The plan is contingent on her going through it. They believe she will because they believe she will be, they used the word irresistible, regarding the threat to the school. The cafe was very quiet. Outside, a tram went past on wet stone. Hermione was looking at the table. Harry looked at the side of her face, the set jaw, the eyes that were doing a very specific thing that meant she was processing something that had also landed in the place where it hurt. They think she'll react instead of think, Harry said. Grav nodded. Harry felt something move in him, not anger or not just anger, but the specific feeling that comes when someone underestimates someone you care about in a way that is both insulting and going to cost them. That's their mistake, he said. Hermione looked up from the table. She looked at Harry, then at Grav, then at Strange. Her jaw was still set, but her eyes were clear. When is the disturbance planned? Soon, Grav said. Rookwood was finalizing the technique when my information was current 4 days ago. I'd estimate within a week. Then we have a week, she said. She looked at Strange. And I have an idea. Strange tilted his head. They want me to open a portal toward Hogwarts when I feel the disturbance, she said. They're counting on a reactive emotional response. See the school in danger, open a portal, give away our location. She straightened her spine. What if we use that? Strange looked at her for a long moment. You want to let them think their plan worked, he said. I want to control what they see, she said. They get a portal trace, but the trace leads somewhere we choose, somewhere that gives us the advantage rather than them. She looked at Harry. The way you herded the Kolkata creature. You want to herd Voldemort's people, Harry said. I want to herd them somewhere we're ready for them, she said. Yes. Strange looked at her with the full weight of his attention for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry. Harry looked back with an expression that said this is what she does and yes simultaneously. Strange turned back to Grav. Is there anything else? One thing, Grav said carefully. The Dark Lord himself, he has been, I'm told, by those closer to him than I care to be, unusually still since the Kolkata incursion, thinking. He looked at Strange. I've been in proximity to that man years ago and I know what his thinking looks like. It is not passive, it is the particular stillness of someone recalculating a strategy entirely. He paused. He has begun to understand that what Potter has been given is not simply additional combat training. He understands that the dimensional layer is involved, and he is, Grav chose the word, adapting. He said it the way you say a word when what you mean is something darker than the word itself suggests. Strange nodded. He stood, put some check crowns on the table and picked up his coat. Thank you, Antonin. Grav looked at Harry one more time, that complicated grief in his eyes. He would have been proud of you, he said simply. Your father. Harry held his eyes for a moment. Thank you, he said, and meant it. They went back out into the Prague morning, the stone saints watching from the bridge, the pewter sky overhead. Strange opened the portal to the sanctum and held it, and as they went through, Harry felt the Horcrux shift, not north this time, not orienting toward Voldemort, something subtler, a pulse, like it had felt something, like something had reached for it. Harry pressed his awareness toward it, hard and steady. Stay still, it stilled. He stepped through the portal. That evening, Strange did something he hadn't done before. He came to the octagonal room after dinner without a specific lesson planned, without chalk or maps or theory to deliver. He sat in one of the chairs and picked up his book, the old, battered one he'd been reading since the first day, and just sat with them while they worked. Harry was practicing attunement at range, pushing the edge of his awareness further out each time, mapping the dimensional signatures around the building with the patient and increasingly precise attention of someone who is learning to read a new language. Hermione was working through something on her own in the corner of the room that involved very small portals, maybe 6 inches across, opened and closed and redirected with a focused intensity that meant she was working out the trap. The room was quiet. The sanctum was quiet. At some point, Strange looked up from his book and said to no one in particular, he used to do this. Neither of them asked who. The quality of the way he said it made the question feel unnecessary. What would you talk about? Hermione asked, not looking up from her work. Arguments mostly, Strange said. He argued with everything I said for the first year, not because he disagreed, because he wanted to understand it well enough to argue about it. It was his form of learning. A pause. I found it profoundly irritating and also effective. Harry glanced at Hermione. She glanced back at him. Neither of them said anything about the fact that this description was a fairly accurate characterization of how both of them had arrived at most of their current understanding. Wong says there's a dimensional anomaly developing off the Norwegian coast, Strange said, turning a page. Unrelated to Voldemort, just a standard fabric-thin point from geological stress. I'll need to address it next week. You'll come. Is it more complicated than Kolkata? Harry asked. Different complicated, Strange said. The entity is benign. The closure technique is different because the cause is geological rather than intentional breach. Good practice for reading natural dimensional stress. He turned another page. Also, Norway is worth seeing. Harry felt the specific warmth of an ordinary moment in the middle of an extraordinary situation. The simple fact of sitting in a room working with someone who was, in a way that Strange would never articulate directly, looking after them. Strange, he said. Strange looked up. The trap, Harry said. The one Hermione's designing. When it works, he paused. We're not just catching Malfoy's people, we are showing Voldemort something. Strange tilted his head. We are showing him that we anticipated him, Harry said. That we were ahead not by luck, by thinking. He met Strange's eyes. That's what you've been building toward, isn't it? Not just the technique, the way we think. Strange looked at him for a long moment. Yes, he said. He looked back at his book. Yes, it is. The evening settled around the sanctum like something that knew it was being used well, the old building with its opinions about things holding its ancient, purposeful quiet. Harry went back to his mapping. Hermione went back to her portals. Strange read his book. Outside, the city burned with 10,000 lights, and somewhere across the ocean in a manor full of dark candles, a man who had been recalculating was nearly finished. The stillness wouldn't last much longer. Chapter 5. The Shape of a Soul. The Norway trip happened on a Tuesday, and it was nothing like Kolkata. For one thing, the landscape. Strange opened the portal to a coastal cliff above the Lofoten Islands, and the world on the other side of it was so aggressively, almost offensively beautiful that Harry stepped through and just stopped walking, because the fjord below was the particular shade of blue that doesn't exist in Britain except in paintings, and the sky above it had clouds in it like something hand-placed. And the mountains on the far side were white at the top and green below, and reflected in the water so perfectly that the whole thing looked like the world had been folded in half along the waterline. Move, Strange said behind him because Harry was blocking the portal. Harry moved. Hermione came through and did exactly the same thing he'd done, stopped, looked, went briefly somewhere private in her expression before pulling herself back. Strange came through last and let the portal close and didn't look at the fjord at all, which either meant he'd long since stopped seeing it or meant he was the kind of person who experienced things internally and didn't show it, and probably both. The thin point is 300 meters north along the cliff, Strange said, already walking. Geological stress from a fault system beneath the seabed. The fabric here has been under chronic pressure for about 6 months and is approaching the point where a natural breach would form. Not a dramatic one, nothing would come through with intent, just a passive bleed of dimensional energy that would affect the local ecosystem in unpleasant ways, and eventually attract attention from things that are opportunistic about that kind of energy leak. Like the Kolkata creature, Harry said, falling into step beside him. Similar category, though this would be smaller. The energy profile of a natural breach is different from an intentional one, less structured, less attractive to territorial entities, more likely to attract something diffuse and ambient. He glanced sideways. Harmless in the Kolkata sense, not harmless in the sense that a dimensional energy bleed near a populated coastal area affects electrical systems, weather patterns, and the psychological baseline of anyone living within 5 kilometers. Psychological baseline, Hermione said from his other side. Chronic low-level dimensional exposure tends toward anxiety and a specific type of dissociative disorientation in humans who aren't attuned, Strange said. The village 3 kilometers south has had an unusually high rate of what the local clinic is recording as generalized anxiety disorder in the last 6 months. It's not a coincidence. Hermione made a note. She was doing that more on field work now, keeping a small notebook that Harry had started thinking of as the catalogue, because that was what it was becoming. A systematic record of everything Strange showed them that wasn't in any book she'd found. The thin point was visible once they reached it, and it looked completely different from the Kolkata breach. No color, no drama, just a quality of wrongness in the air above a particular stretch of cliff, a shimmer that wasn't heat, a place where the wind seemed to behave incorrectly, moving through the space in the wrong direction at the wrong speed. It was, Harry thought, more unsettling than the Kolkata breach precisely because it was so quiet. The Kolkata breach had announced itself. This one just quietly was. The technique, Strange said, not reconstitution. The underlying structure is intact, just under compression. What you're doing here is decompression. You're reducing the geological pressure on the fabric by redistributing it along the fault line. Think of it as spreading a load. He looked at Hermione. Your architectural instinct is suited for this. You're building a support structure in the fabric rather than closing a wound. And for me, Harry said. You're the load distribution, Strange said. You take the concentrated stress from the thin point and move it not away because it has nowhere to go except along the existing fault, but along the fault in a pattern that doesn't exceed the fabric's tolerance at any single point. Harry looked at the shimmer, felt it in the fabric, chronic and dense, accumulated pressure with nowhere to express itself, like a held breath. How far does the fault run? 30 kilometers, Strange said. You'll be working at significant range. Harry hadn't worked at that range before. He noted this without alarm, assessed it, found the edge of his current attunement reach and thought about what pushing past it would feel like. Can I do it from here or do I need to be over the water? Strange gave him a sideways look that was almost approving. The cliff is fine. The fault is accessible from surface level. Harry found the fault in the fabric the way he'd been learning to find everything in it, by feel, by the dimensional sense that had become in 3 weeks as natural as hearing. The fault was enormous, a vast, deep structure of geological stress translated into dimensional terms, and working with it felt completely different from any exercise they'd done in the sanctum. Not a small room, not a controlled environment, the actual Earth. He found the concentrated pressure at the thin point and started to move it. Slowly, deliberately, the way you'd move something genuinely heavy, not fighting it, working with the direction it wanted to go anyway, just distributing the impulse. He felt it start to shift, felt the thin point ease slightly. Beside him, Hermione was already building. Could feel her work in the fabric, the characteristic precision of it, the architectural quality, laying support into the dimensional structure around the thin point with a focus that was different from the displacement training, more patient, more like something grown than something moved. She was reinforcing the fabric as he decompressed it, the two techniques working together without either of them having discussed the sequence, the coherence Strange had named coming into play naturally and completely. It took 40 minutes. It was not dramatic. The shimmer faded incrementally, the fabric settling beneath their hands with a slow, deep satisfaction that felt nothing like closing the Kolkata breach, less violent, more fundamental, like the difference between stopping a fight and resolving the argument underneath it. When it was done, the cliff was just a cliff. The wind moved correctly. Somewhere below them, a seal surfaced in the fjord and looked up at nothing in particular and went back under. Strange had not helped. He'd stood 10 feet back the entire time with his hands in his coat pockets and let them work. Harry turned to look at him. Good, Strange said. That's all, Harry said. I'd say very good, but I don't want it to go to your head. He was already turning back the way they'd come. The village should start showing measurable improvement in psychological baseline within a week. The fault will need monitoring but not intervention for the foreseeable future. He glanced back. Don't get comfortable. The Norway method doesn't transfer directly to most other geological cases. Every fault is different. Of course it is, Hermione said, already writing in the catalogue. You're going to fill that thing in a month, Harry said. I'm going to need a second one in a week, she said, not looking up. They followed Strange back to the portal. Harry looked back once at the fjord, the blue so deep it almost hurt. The mountains reflecting in water so still the reflection was indistinguishable from the thing reflected. He thought about the village 3 kilometers south and the people in it who'd been feeling wrong for 6 months without knowing why, who would start feeling better this week and not know why that either. And there was something in that anonymity that he found unexpectedly satisfying. Not the credit, just the fixing. He went through the portal. The trap took 4 days to build, and it was almost entirely Hermione's design. She laid it out for Strange the evening they got back from Norway, drawing diagrams on the slate with the chalk while Strange sat in the chair with his book and asked questions, and Harry sat on the work table with his arms folded reading the room, which was a skill he'd been developing as a counterweight to everyone else's tendency to be in their own head. The core of it was elegant. Rookwood's plan required her to open a portal toward Hogwarts in response to a dimensional disturbance in the castle. What she would actually do when the disturbance came was open a portal that appeared to originate from the sanctum, but in fact originated from a false position, a dimensionally decay location she'd pre-established in the fabric, like a mirror placed in a corridor to make it look like the corridor continues when it doesn't. The decoy position has to be somewhere they'd believe was the sanctum, Strange said, somewhere with a dimensional character consistent with a building of this age and this level of protection. I was thinking the ruins of Tintagel, Hermione said, not looking up from the slate. The castle ruins in Cornwall. They have significant accumulated magical history. Arthurian tradition has a dimensional basis that's well documented in your library. I read about it in Chapter 14 of the supplementary text you left on my desk on day 6. The character would read as old and heavily protected to anyone doing a trace. Strange was quiet for a moment. You read the supplementary text. I read everything you leave on my desk, she said. I assumed that was the point. It was, he said. Tintagel is correct. The Arthurian dimensional layer is specifically relevant because it was an early sorcerer's installation, predating Hogwarts by several centuries, and the resonance would read as consistent with my operational base to anyone using the Darkhold perception. So they trace the portal to Tintagel, Harry said. They think they've found us, they go to Tintagel. He looked at Hermione. And then what? She turned from the slate. She was wearing the expression that meant she'd thought the whole sequence through and was now in the clean, certain space on the other side of the thinking. Then they're where we want them, she said. Which is a ruined castle, Harry said, which is a dimensionally rich location with significant structural complexity in the fabric, where our attunement advantages over Death Eaters are at their maximum. She tilted her head. They'll bring people who can fight. Rookwood will be among them if he thinks he's found the sanctum and can confirm what we've been doing. She looked at Strange. What's Rookwood's dimensional capability independently without the Darkhold fragment? Significant, Strange said. He's a self-taught practitioner, unconventional, opportunistic, creative in ways that formal training sometimes suppresses. He won't fight the way I'd expect, he'll improvise. He paused, which means you'll need to have improvised better in advance. Hence the trap, Hermione said. Hence the trap, Strange agreed. He set his book down the first time Harry had seen him put it down voluntarily in the evening. He looked at the diagram on the slate with the full quality of his attention, reading it the way he read difficult texts, completely and without hurry. The false portal is the centerpiece, he said, but a trap with only one mechanism is a gamble. What are your contingencies? Harry spoke before Hermione did because this was the part he'd been working on. Perimeter, he said. Same as what you set up in Kolkata, dimensional anchors around the site, but placed before the encounter, not during, so when they arrive the perimeter is already set. Strange looked at him. You can place anchors at range. I've been practicing, Harry said simply. Since when? Since Kolkata, a pause. I've been doing it at night, in the attunement sessions. I can reach about 8 kilometers consistently now. Strange looked at him with an expression that was, in Harry's growing reading of the man, as close to startled as he got. Tintagel is 12 kilometers from the nearest coastal town, he said. I know, Harry said. I'll need another week. I'll have it. Strange looked at him for a long moment, then he looked at Hermione, then back at Harry. Right, he said, and picked his book back up, which was the closest he'd ever come to saying excellent. The 5th day after Norway, Harry woke up wrong. Not from a dream or from something that wasn't quite a dream, something that lived in the borderland between sleep and consciousness where the Horcrux had always done its worst work. He came out of it fast, sitting up in the grey pre-dawn with his hand at his forehead and his scar pulse of specific cold heat that was different from the directional press he'd grown used to. Not orienting, not the compass pull, something else. He sat still and attuned, found the Horcrux in the interface and felt it doing something it hadn't done before, not pressing outward, pressing inward, against his own center, against the warm presence that was his magic with a concentrated and deliberate force that felt for the first time intentional rather than instinctive. He was out of the room and down the corridor before he'd consciously decided to move. Strange's door was the third on the left. Harry didn't knock, he opened it. Strange was sitting in the chair by the window fully dressed, which confirmed Harry's suspicion that Strange didn't sleep much, reading in a lamp's worth of pale light, and he looked up when the door opened with the expression of a man who was not surprised to see anyone because he had stopped expecting his evenings to be uninterrupted sometime around a decade ago. He looked at Harry's face. He put the book down. Sit, he said. Harry sat on the edge of the bed, the only other seating in the room, and pressed his awareness into the interface with both hands metaphorically, holding his center steady against the inward pressure. It wasn't strong enough to move him, but it was deliberate. It's doing something new, Harry said. He described it precisely, the way Strange had trained him to describe things without editorializing, just the mechanics. Strange listened. When Harry finished, he was quiet for a moment. How long ago did it start? Maybe an hour, I don't know exactly, I was half asleep. Strange stood up. Come with me. They went to the octagonal room, which at this hour was lit by the ambient glow the building maintained overnight, warm and low and sourceless. Strange didn't turn on any additional light. He moved to the center of the room and stood for a moment with his eyes closed, attuning, and Harry stood with him and did the same, and in the fabric of the room Strange's presence was a completely distinct and extraordinarily deep signature, old and layered and precise in a way Harry suspected took decades to develop. The inward pressure, Strange said, eyes still closed. It started tonight specifically. Has anything changed in your practice in the last 24 hours that you haven't told me about? Harry thought. Then he thought about the anchor placement practice, about pushing to 12 kilometers last night, about what happened when he'd hit 12 and found the edge of his reach and pushed past it. I extended my attunement range, he said. Last night, past where I'd been before, I got to 12. Strange opened his eyes. I know what you're going to say, Harry started. I'm not going to say anything yet, Strange said. He looked at Harry with that reading data expression, full and careful. When you extended past your previous range, describe what it felt like at the moment you went through. Harry thought about it. Like going through a threshold, he said. Like the resistance dropped. It was harder to get there than 11 kilometers, and then it wasn't like something gave way. And after that it felt very clear. Strange nodded slowly. You broke a natural ceiling, he said. Your attunement range expanded suddenly rather than gradually. When that happens, the dimensional interface, the whole of it, not just the reach, undergoes a rapid recalibration. For most practitioners, it's minor. He paused. For you, the recalibration is complicated by the Horcrux. Because the Horcrux is in the interface, Harry said. Because the Horcrux is in the interface and the rapid expansion disturbed the existing dynamic, Strange said. The isolation you've been maintaining, the instinctive containment, was calibrated to your previous ceiling. The expansion shifted the parameters. The Horcrux is taking advantage of the recalibration period. Harry held this information very still in his mind. Is it going to keep doing it? Until you re-establish the containment at the new parameters, Strange said, which is the work of attunement, conscious, deliberate, specific. He sat down, not at the table, on the floor, and gestured for Harry to do the same. They sat cross-legged, facing each other in the low amber glow. We're going to do this now. Tonight I'll guide the attunement, you do the work. All right, Harry said. This will be uncomfortable, Strange said. It was not a warning with padding around it, just information, possibly significantly. The Horcrux will resist. It always resists containment. The inward pressure you felt is specifically because it's testing the new parameters. When we consciously address it, it will test harder. Tell me what to do, Harry said. Strange held his eyes for a moment. Then he said, find your center, exactly as we've done every morning. Exactly the same, don't reach past it, don't extend toward anything, just the center. Harry found it, the warm presence, the thing that breathed, right there. Now find the Horcrux, Strange said. Not with fear, not with hostility, with the same quality of attention you'd use to attune to the fabric. Neutral, precise. Harry found it, cold spot, heavy, the dimensional object that didn't belong, pressing inward now with a focused and ugly intent. He felt it fully for the first time in months, not the managed awareness of the containment but the actual thing itself, present and conscious and hostile, and it was like looking directly at something he'd been carefully not looking at in peripheral vision and finding it worse than imagined. He held his attention steady. Good, Strange said quietly. What you're going to do is re-establish the boundary, not by force, not by pushing at it, by being more present in your own center than the fragment is. The boundary is your presence itself. The more fully and deeply you are in your center, the less space there is for the fragment to press into. Harry understood this. He'd understood it in the abstract from the first week's theory. Doing it with the full weight of the Horcrux's attention pressing against his center was different from understanding it. He went deeper into his center, not down, deeper somehow into the specificity of what it was. Not his magic in general, but his magic in particular, the specific individual quality of it that was his and only his, that had bloomed in a cupboard under stairs and learned its first words on a cold morning in November, and had been there in the graveyard and the Department of Mysteries and every dark corridor he'd ever run through. The thing that was, whatever else was also true, entirely and irrevocably him. The Horcrux pushed. He pushed back with being present, with himself. Specifically, precisely, completely himself, which was strange as a weapon, but it was what he had, and he used it with everything he'd learned in 3 weeks about the relationship between a practitioner and the fabric, between intent and reality. The Horcrux pushed harder. Harry pushed back, still steady, not with force but with the absolute stubborn fact of his own existence, which had been being used to anchor him to life since he was 1 year old, and which was, he realized with a clarity that felt almost like laughter, genuinely indestructible by design because it had survived this fragment's master in its first attempt and had been surviving him ever since. The fragment stilled. The cold inward pressure receded. The boundary re-established, not the old one, a new one calibrated to the expanded parameters, and it fit the new shape of his attunement like a lock, engaging, clean and certain and quiet. Harry breathed. Strange was watching him with complete attention. Done, Harry said. Yes, Strange said. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something Harry had never heard him say before with this specific quality. Are you all right? Yeah, Harry said. Then, because Strange had asked the real question and Strange was owed a real answer. It's angry, the fragment. I can feel the anger in it now as a specific thing, not just a pressure. It knows it's contained and he stopped. It's been there my whole life, angry and contained my whole life. Strange nodded. He said nothing, which was the correct response to a thing that didn't need a response, just acknowledgement. I'm not afraid of it, Harry said, not assertively, just accurately. That's new. Been managing it, containing it, but underneath there was always, I didn't know it was there until now. Fear that it was part of me, that it would always be there, that it would eventually. He stopped. Win, Strange said. Yeah, and now? Harry looked at the floor, thought about what had just happened, the boundary, the stubborn fact of himself, the way the fragment had simply lost when faced with the full, intentional weight of his own presence. It can't win, he said. I didn't know that before. I knew it in theory, but now I know it. Strange looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was, stripped of its professional precision, simply kind. Good, he said. Go back to sleep, we have work in the morning. Harry went back to bed. He lay in the pre-dawn quiet with the boundary firm and the Horcrux cold and silent in its proper place, and felt something he couldn't name exactly, something that was the specific opposite of helplessness, which was not the same as invincibility and was in some ways better. He was asleep in 10 minutes. The door to the east corridor opened on a Wednesday. Not the closed room that was further down, and that door was still closed, had remained closed through 4 weeks of training with the specific quality of something that had made up its mind. But the door at the beginning of the corridor, which had always been unremarkable, open, leading to a library annex that Hermione had been using for overflow reading, that door opened on Wednesday afternoon onto something different. Hermione noticed it first because she was going to the annex for a book, and found herself instead looking into a room she'd never seen before, circular, small, with a single reading chair and a table with one object on it. She stood in the doorway and looked at the object on the table. It was a mirror roughly 2 feet tall in a plain wooden frame. It was not reflecting the room. It was reflecting something else, a steady, dim view of an interior space she didn't immediately recognize, stone walls and low torchlight, the kind of view you'd get from a window in a basement room. The sanctum's awareness did something around her, not alarm, more like introduction. She went to find Strange. He was in the garden with Harry, who was practicing range attunement, lying on his back in the early September grass with his eyes closed and his arms at his sides doing something that looked like sleeping and was in fact 12 kilometers of focused dimensional reach. Strange was sitting on the garden wall reading, which he did when Harry's practice sessions didn't require active guidance. There's a room, Hermione said, in the east corridor, a mirror. Strange looked up. He looked at the door she gestured toward. She'd left it open, the view into the circular room visible from here. His expression shifted slightly. Right, he said. Right meaning you know what it is. Right meaning the sanctum has decided you should see it. He folded his book. That happens occasionally. The building identifies a tool that's relevant to something a practitioner needs and makes it accessible. He looked at her with careful attention. What you're about to work with is a dimensional reflector, not a scrying instrument. What it shows is not a person or a location that you choose. It shows dimensional signatures, objects with significant dimensional presence projected through the fabric as visual information. Hermione felt the implication settle. It would show Horcruxes, she said. If calibrated correctly, Strange said, and if the practitioner using it has a clear reference signature to calibrate from. He looked at her for a moment. Which you do. She thought about the cold spot in Harry's interface, the feeling of it, the specific, unmistakable quality of a soul fragment's dimensional signature, which she'd been carrying in her attunement sense as a reference point since the night she'd read it. She'd been holding it the way you hold a musical note in your memory when you're trying to find it in a chord. It would show me where the other Horcruxes are, she said. Show you the dimensional pull toward them at minimum, Strange said. Location would be approximate. The reflector gives directional information rather than coordinates, but direction and distance can be enough. Combined with Harry's compass, Hermione said. Combined with Harry's compass, Strange confirmed. She went back to the circular room. She sat in the reading chair, which turned out to be positioned at the correct distance from the mirror's surface, and she looked into the reflection, the stone room, the torchlight, currently showing nothing meaningful, just waiting. She found the reference signature in her attunement sense, the cold spot, the heavy, specific quality of the soul fragment in Harry's interface. She held it the way Strange had taught her to hold a dimensional read, neutral, precise, present, and she directed that attention at the mirror. The reflection in the mirror changed. It didn't give her a room or a location, it gave her light in directional form, 4 distinct points of cold illumination in the reflection space, each one carrying that same unmistakable signature of wrongness, of the deliberate fracture of something that should be whole. 4 Horcruxes visible in the dimensional fabric through the reflector's lens. She attuned her awareness to each one in turn, got directions, got rough distances by the quality of the pull. The stronger the signal, the closer the object. The locket was the closest. Scotland, she thought, Highland. The cup was east of that, she felt it in the mirror's orientation shifting farther east, possibly continental. The diadem was above. That was the most specific feeling of all, not directional in the horizontal sense but vertical, as if the object was at elevation, and paired with the Hogwarts attunement she'd always had, the library, the corridors, the specific dimensional character of the castle she'd spent 7 years in, she knew immediately and with certainty. Ravenclaw's diadem. In the castle. The fourth was moving. She tried to read it and it shifted, changed direction, not erratic but deliberately mobile. The snake. Nagini, she sat back from the mirror and wrote everything in the catalogue, every detail, every directional reading, the specific quality of each signature. Then she went back outside to where Harry was still lying in the grass and Strange was still on the wall. I have them, she said. Harry opened his eyes. She told them. Strange listened with his book closed in his hands, and when she finished he stood up from the wall and said, the locket first. You're certain about Scotland? It's in the mountains, she said, north and west. The signal is isolated, no surrounding population density in the fabric, wilderness. A cave or a fixed concealed location, Strange said. He looked at Harry. You've been looking for these. Since 5th year, Harry said. He was sitting up now, cross-legged in the grass, and he looked at Hermione with an expression that was complicated in a way she recognized as him trying to process several things at once. Relief, focus, something beneath both of those that was connected to the conversation in the middle of the night about the fragment and its anger. How confident are you in the readings? Completely, she said, not arrogantly, with the precision of someone who has done a thing and knows exactly how well they did it. Harry nodded. That was enough for him. When Strange looked at both of them, he looked at the sky above the garden, which was doing an early September thing with light and cloud that made it look older than usual. He looked at the sanctum's windows as if consulting it. Not yet, he said. You need 2 more things before Horcrux retrieval. Harry and Hermione looked at him. The procedure to neutralize the Horcrux inside Harry, Strange said, which we said required a month, and we are approaching that timeline. And the Tintagel trap, which is coming whether we're ready or not, because Rookwood's disturbance has been building in the fabric for 3 days and will be fully active within the next 48 hours. He looked at each of them in turn. We handle the trap first because we don't control that timeline, then the procedure, then the Horcrux hunt. He paused. Those 3 things in that order is not the most satisfying sequence I've ever offered anyone, but it is the correct one. Harry didn't argue. Neither did Hermione, though she looked at the catalogue in her hands with the specific expression of someone who has found a thing and wants badly to go after it and is choosing to be patient because patience is currently the right tool. 2 days, Strange said, which means tomorrow we run the procedure because I want it completed before the trap deploys. He looked at Harry specifically with the full quality of that reading data attention. Are you ready? Harry thought about the night before, the re-established boundary, the thing he'd found in his center that he hadn't known was there, the specific feeling of the Horcrux's anger as something separate from him, defined and containable, unable to win. Yes, he said. Strange nodded once. Tomorrow morning then. He looked back at his book. Both of you eat something. You look like people who have been forgetting to eat, which is a predictable consequence of meaningful work and a habit I'd prefer you to correct. They went inside. The morning of the procedure was very still. Harry noticed it from the moment he woke up, not the sanctum's quiet, which he'd grown used to, but something else, a quality of the day that felt like held breath. Outside the window the garden was barely moving, a thin high cloud cover making the light diffuse, and even the kind of light that doesn't cast shadows. He dressed, went downstairs. Ate because Strange had said to, and also because Hermione had appeared in the kitchen and was making tea with a focused efficiency that meant she was managing anxiety by being useful. He ate. She made tea and poured him a cup without asking, and they sat at the kitchen table together in the specific comfortable silence of people who are worried about something and have agreed without discussing it that they aren't going to perform not being worried. It'll work, she said eventually. I know, Harry said. Strange knows exactly what he's doing. I know, and you know what you're doing now. 3 weeks ago you didn't, but you do now. Harry looked at her. Hermione, I know I'm not scared. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I might be, she said very quietly. A little. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, I know you're allowed. She nodded precisely once and went back to her tea. Strange came in, looked at them both, assessed whatever he saw and said, ready when you are. The octagonal room had been rearranged. The chairs were gone, the work table cleared to the edges of the room. In the center of the floor Strange had drawn a diagram in chalk, intricate, precise, geometric. A series of interlocking circles with specific symbols at their intersections that Harry didn't know yet but recognized as intentional in their placement, the way you recognize deliberate architecture even in a language you don't speak. Harry stood in the center of the diagram. Hermione stood at its edge, her sling ring on, her expression controlled and exact. Strange stood at the diagram's apex, which put him between Harry and the room's single tall window. The procedure, Strange said, works in 3 stages. In the first stage, I'll use deep attunement to establish contact with the interface directly, not the Horcrux, the interface itself, your center. This creates a stable working space for what follows. He looked at Harry. You'll feel me in your dimensional space, don't resist it. Harry nodded. In the second stage, I'll isolate the fragment from the interface. This is the precision work separating the fragment's dimensional connection from your center's connection without collapsing either. It's surgery. He met Harry's eyes. During this stage, the fragment will resist, actively and as we discussed, with full consciousness. Your job is to hold your center exactly as you held it 2 nights ago. Present, specific, completely yourself. Don't fight the fragment, just be more present than it is. Understood, Harry said. In the third stage, Strange said, I'll neutralize the fragment. What that means dimensionally is collapsing its connection to Voldemort's soul network while leaving your interface intact. The fragment will cease to function as a Horcrux. It will remain as scar tissue, dimensionally inert, present but powerless. He paused. After that, it's over. The procedure is complete. And Voldemort feels it, Hermione asked. He'll feel the loss of the anchor, Strange said. One of his safeguards failing. He won't know how or from where. He'll know that something significant has changed. He looked at Harry, which he'll be disturbed by because he has no framework for understanding how a Horcrux can be neutralized non-destructively. In his model, the only way this happens is if the host dies. The implication sat in the room for a moment. He'll think I'm dead, Harry said. Briefly, Strange said, until he confirms otherwise, which buys us time. He looked at the diagram. Questions. What does Hermione do? Harry asked. He'd noticed she had her ring on. She anchors, Strange said. The procedure generates significant dimensional turbulence. She maintains the perimeter, keeps the working space clean and contained. Nothing comes in from outside, nothing gets out from inside. He looked at her. If anything goes wrong with my work inside the interface, you'll feel it in the perimeter. Tell me immediately. I will, she said. Strange looked at Harry one final time. The reading data expression full and careful. Whatever he read, he seemed satisfied with it. All right, he said. Close your eyes, find your center. Harry closed his eyes, found his center immediately, the warm presence breathing in time with him, completely his. He felt the room around him, Hermione at the edge of the diagram with her attunement steady and structured, Strange at the apex doing something with his reach that Harry couldn't follow precisely but felt approach from outside his interface. Then Strange's attunement touched his interface and the world went very still. It was nothing like the inward pressure of the Horcrux. Strange's presence in the interface was precise and clean and light, a scalpel rather than a fist. It moved through the interface with a quality that Harry's center registered as careful. Not cautious exactly, but caring in the clinical sense, the way a surgeon's hands care about what they touch. The isolation stage began. Harry felt it as a distinction, Strange drawing a line, dimensional and exact, between his center and the fragment. Not a wall, more like a definition. A statement about where one thing ended and another began, made in the language of the fabric itself. The fragment felt it immediately. The cold spot shuddered, pressed inward hard. Harry was more present than it. He poured himself into his center, every memory, every truth, every specific thing that was entirely his, and he pressed that presence against the fragment's press with the unhurried, absolute certainty of someone who has finally understood what they're made of. The fragment pushed harder. He pushed back with just being there, being exactly, specifically, irrevocably himself. The fragment screamed. It was not a sound. It was a dimensional event, a wave of cold hostility that radiated outward from the interface with the specific, concentrated fury of something that had been contained against its will for 16 years and understood that its containment was about to become permanent. Harry felt it hit the perimeter Hermione was holding and felt her absorb it without flinching, her structural attunement taking the wave and distributing it along the containment boundary with architectural precision. Strange worked in the silence behind the screaming. Harry couldn't see what he was doing. He could feel the edges of it, the precision, the patience, the specific quality of Strange's dimensional capability applied at its finest and most focused, which was extraordinary in a way that Harry filed for later because right now he had a soul fragment trying to re-establish itself inside his center and he was not going to let it. He did not let it, he held. The fragment pushed with everything it had. It was, Harry realized with a strange, distant clarity, actually afraid. The piece of Voldemort's soul was afraid because it understood what was happening to it. Because it had survived this long by persisting, and persistence was the only mode it had, and persistence was failing, and it understood what failure meant. Harry felt no pity for it. He felt something more useful than pity. A clear, exact understanding that this thing had been inside him his whole life, making everything darker and harder and heavier, and it had never deserved to be there, and the work Strange was doing was not revenge, and not violence, but simply the correction of something that should never have been. The neutralization was not dramatic. It was the most quiet thing Harry had ever felt dimensionally. Strange drawing the fragment's connection to Voldemort's network closed with a movement that was, in the fabric, precisely as final as a door closing and precisely as simple. Then Strange withdrew, and the cold spot was still there, but cold in a different way. Cold the way a stone is cold, not the way ice is cold. Inert, dead. Scar tissue, Strange had said, and that was exactly what it felt like, the mark of a wound that had healed into something that didn't hurt anymore. Harry breathed. Done, Strange said. Harry opened his eyes. The octagonal room looked the same. The chalk diagram was slightly smudged where the dimensional turbulence had disturbed the air closest to the floor. Strange was standing at the apex looking at Harry with the careful attention of someone completing a post-procedural check. Hermione was at the perimeter edge and she had her eyes open and she was looking at Harry with an expression that was, briefly, completely unguarded. He looked back at her, nodded. She closed her eyes for just a second, opened them. The expression went back to composed. "How do you feel?" Strange asked. Harry took stock, found his center warm, breathing entirely his, found the fragment cold and still and completely powerless. Found the Horcrux's connection to Voldemort's network, which had been all his life, a thread of dark energy running northward from his scar. The thread was gone. "Lighter," Harry said. Then he thought that was inadequate to what he actually felt and tried again, like when you've been carrying something for so long you've forgotten the shape of your own body without it and then you put it down. Strange held his eyes. Something moved in his face, brief, genuine, past his professional composure before he could arrange it. "Good," he said. Hermione crossed the diagram and stood in front of Harry and looked at him for a long moment with the specific attunement she'd been developing, reading his dimensional signature. What she saw made her exhale a long, controlled breath that was also, Harry thought, relief. "It worked," she said to Strange. "It worked," Strange confirmed. She looked at Harry. "You look different," she said. "Your signature, it's," she searched for the right word, "cleaner." "I'll take cleaner," Harry said. She gave him a look that was trying very hard not to be emotional and managing about 70% success. He gave her a look back that said he noticed and appreciated the effort and they didn't need to discuss it. She turned to the slate and picked up the catalogue and started writing. Strange began erasing the chalk diagram with careful, specific strokes. Harry watched him work for a moment. "Strange," he said. Strange didn't look up. "Thank you," Harry said. Strange erased another section of diagram. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke his voice had the quality it sometimes got in the evenings in the garden, less precise, more present. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We still have a trap to spring, 3 Horcruxes to destroy, 1 to locate, and a war to end." "I know," Harry said. "I'm thanking you for the thing that just happened. The other things are separate." Strange stopped erasing. He looked at Harry with the full reading data attention, and then he looked away again and went back to the chalk. "You're welcome," he said, like someone who hasn't said those words for a while and isn't sure of their weight anymore and is deciding to say them anyway. That afternoon, in a manor in Wiltshire, Lucius Malfoy felt something change. He was in the library when it happened, which was where he spent most of his time these days, and it wasn't something he felt so much as something that went silent. The Darkhold's passive perception, Rookwood's careful, expensive, methodical activation of the page, had been maintaining a low but constant awareness of the dimensional signature emanating from the sanctum's direction, a cold background hum of information that Lucius had become accustomed to. Not much, enough to know the training continued. It stopped, not the screen. The screen had gone up weeks ago and blocked the primary signal. This was something smaller, something the screen hadn't caught because it was too close to its source to have a detectable spatial signature. The Horcrux, the fragment his master had placed in the boy, which had been a passive dimensional marker without anyone realizing it. A signal Rookwood had been able to read faintly through the Darkhold perception, a confirmation that the boy was alive and where he was. It was gone. Lucius sat very still. He was a precise man and he did not jump to conclusions. He considered. The fragment signal going silent had 2 possible explanations. The boy was dead or the fragment had been neutralized. The first was simple. The second was extraordinary, almost impossible. And yet, he thought about reconstituted. He thought about the word Caro had used describing the Kolkata closure. He thought about what kind of practitioner could reconstitute a dimensional breach and then apply the same fundamental capability to Horcrux neutralization. He thought about what it meant that the boy was now, if his analysis was correct, no longer carrying his master's safeguard. He thought about what the Dark Lord would do when he felt it. He had perhaps 6 hours before the Dark Lord summoned him, perhaps less. He picked up his quill. He needed to be ahead of this. He needed to have information his master didn't, the shape of what had happened, the identity of who had done it, the capability they were facing. He needed to not be the messenger of bad news with nothing in his hands but the news. He wrote quickly, 3 letters, 3 contacts, 1 to Rookwood, telling him to accelerate the Hogwarts disturbance, now tonight, before the Dark Lord's mood made everything more dangerous. 1 to his man in Edinburgh, beginning inquiries about dimensional practitioners operating out of America. And 1, the most important, the most careful, to a contact in the Department of Mysteries who had survived the Ministry's turn and was currently in a position to access information about specific American magical entities registered in international records. He needed a name. He sealed all 3 letters, called his owl, sent them. Then he went to wait for his master's summons, which came 47 minutes later. He was ready, or as ready as anyone was for that. At the sanctum, Harry sat on the roof in the September evening and felt the difference. It was remarkable, the absence. Not an absence of power, if anything the opposite, the feeling of his own magical center without the Horcrux's weight against it was like. He thought about Hermione's words, the shape of you changes around it, and thought about what it felt like to recover the shape you'd almost forgotten you had. He'd been fighting his whole life with something pressing against the inside of his chest. He hadn't known that until it stopped. He felt the empty thread where the Horcrux's connection to Voldemort's network had been. The compass was gone, that was fine. He had Hermione's mirror for finding what needed finding. He didn't need the tether to tell him where the war was. He knew where the war was. The war was coming to them, 48 hours. Hermione came through the roof door and sat beside him the way she always did, without ceremony, without announcement, just present. She had the catalogue in her lap. The locket is somewhere called Grimmauld Place, she said. I went back to the mirror this afternoon. The pull from the Highland signal is wrong. It's not mountains, it's a building. Old, urban, dimensionally unusual. I think I was reading the isolation wrong before. It's in London. Harry looked at her. Grimmauld Place is a real place. It was Sirius's house. He paused. It's the Order's headquarters. Something moved in Hermione's expression. Not surprise, the satisfaction of a piece slotting into place. That's why the signal is so unusual. The building has Fidelius protection, and the dimensional character of a secret-kept space is... The locket was at Grimmauld Place, Harry said. Unless it's been moved, she said. Recently, the signal is fresh enough that I think it's current. Harry thought about this, about going back to Grimmauld Place, about what that would feel like in the rooms where Sirius had been most himself, confined and frustrated and alive. He let the feeling be there without pushing it away. Then he set it aside with the deliberate, clean motion that Strange had been teaching him to use on difficult things. After the trap, he said. After the trap, she agreed. They sat on the roof in the early evening, the city doing its thing below and around them, and Harry thought about all of it, the procedure that morning, the Horcrux mapping, the trap coming in 48 hours, the locket in a house full of memories, the other Horcruxes waiting in the directions the mirror had shown. He thought about the war, which had a shape now that it hadn't had before, not just threat and survival, an actual shape with an actual end in it. Strange said, after the trap and the Horcrux hunt we go back, Harry said, to Hogwarts for 6th year. I know, Hermione said, it's going to be different. It was always going to be different, she said, but yes, more than the usual different. Harry looked at the skyline. Are you ready for that? She thought about it honestly, which was always what she did. I think so. The Hogwarts version of me and the person who did dimensional reconstitution in Kolkata are, she paused, not entirely the same person. No, Harry agreed, they're not. She looked at him. Is that all right, do you think? Harry thought about Privet Drive and the garden shed roof, and sitting with a book he'd already read 3 times because there was nothing else to do, and the summer that had felt like the bottom of a pool, and then the morning Strange had come through a rift in the garden with his scarred hands and his burgundy cloak, and his complete and specific refusal to have any patience for anything that wasn't the truth. Yeah, he said, I think it's more than all right. The city burned below them and the sanctum breathed behind them, and somewhere in the dark to the north a trap was almost ready to spring, and beyond that the remaining Horcruxes waited in their hiding places to be found. The stillness before a storm, but a different kind of stillness now, not the stillness of someone bracing for what's coming, the stillness of someone about to move. Chapter 6, 2 worlds breaking. The disturbance hit the fabric at 3 in the morning. Harry felt it before he was fully awake, a sharp, deliberate wrongness in the dimensional sense, specific and intentional in a way that natural stress never was. He was sitting up before the feeling resolved into meaning, and by the time it did he was already reaching for his sling ring on the nightstand. Hogwarts, not a gradual thing. Rookwood had introduced it cleanly and fast, a concentrated pulse of dimensional distortion into the castle's fabric, precisely calibrated to register with an attuned practitioner who had a deep connection to the place. Like pressing a bruise, Harry felt it, and he also felt Hermione feel it, her signature in the ambient fabric of the sanctum going from sleeping still to fully alert in the space of 2 seconds. He was in the corridor when her door opened. She was already dressed, had probably slept dressed, which he would have found funny at a different moment, and her ring was on and her expression was the one she wore when she'd shifted fully into operational mode, everything personal filed away, everything relevant brought forward. It's artificial, she said. I know. Rookwood's technique, not a real threat to the castle. I know. He looked at her. You ready? She held up the catalogue. She'd marked 3 pages. They went down the stairs together, not running but moving fast, and Strange was in the octagonal room already, which meant he'd felt it too, or he simply never slept, and he was standing at the work table looking at them with both hands flat on its surface. The disturbance is active, he said. How do you feel it? Artificial, Harry said. Wrong quality, too precise for natural stress. Rookwood's work. Hermione, targeted at my connection specifically, she said. Designed to register as critical, the kind of thing you'd feel and immediately want to address. She said it flatly, without anger, just analysis. It's good work. If I didn't know it was coming, I'd have been through a portal before I was fully awake. But you know it's coming, Strange said. We know it's coming, she said. Strange looked at her for a moment, then he looked at the room. Walk me through the deployment. Hermione set the catalogue on the table and opened to the first marked page. The false portal opens from here in the octagonal room. The origin signature needs to read as this building to anyone tracing it, so I keep my sanctum attunement active during the opening, let the building's character bleed through my dimensional signature. She turned to the second page. The destination is Tintagel. I've been attuning to the ruins for 3 days. Strange took me there twice to walk the site. She looked at Strange briefly. The dimensional character of Tintagel is consistent with a sorcerer's base. Deep, layered, protected, a trace will read it as exactly what Rookwood expects to find. And the perimeter, Strange asked. Harry spoke. I placed the anchors yesterday, 12-kilometer spread centered on the ruin's main tower. If anything enters the space between the cliff edge and the inland boundary, the perimeter activates. He paused. I also placed a secondary set inside the ruin itself, closer quarters. Strange looked at him. When did you do the inner perimeter? Tuesday night, Harry said. I didn't mention it because I wasn't sure it would hold at that precision until I tested it Wednesday morning. He met Strange's eyes. It held. Strange looked at him for a moment with the full weight of that attention, and then he said, "What precision are we talking about?" "Individual room-sized spaces," Harry said. "I can close the perimeter around a space about 30 feet across." Room was quiet for 2 seconds. "Right," Strange said. He straightened up from the table. "Hermione opens the false portal. They trace it. They send people to Tintagel, which means at least a 12-minute window from trace to arrival, probably more if they're being careful." He looked at Harry. "You and I go to Tintagel before she opens the portal, and we are already there when they arrive." "I thought you might say that," Harry said. "She holds the sanctum," Strange said, looking at Hermione. "She maintains the false signal, keeps the portal's origin signature active from this end, so if they do a secondary trace during the engagement it still reads as live. And she monitors the sanctum's perimeter. And if something comes here instead," Hermione said. "Nothing comes here instead," Strange said. "Voldemort's people don't know where here is. That's the point of the trap." He paused. "However, the sanctum's structural defenses are active and the building has its own opinions about unauthorized entry. You are not unprotected." Hermione looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. "I wasn't expressing concern for myself. I was establishing the contingency so we all know it." Strange looked at her for a moment. "Yes," he said, "I know." Something moved in his expression, appreciation perhaps for the precision. "If the engagement at Tintagel goes wrong, I'll send a signal through the fabric. You'll know what it is. You come through immediately." "Understood," she said. "Right." Strange looked between them. "Questions? How many people are they sending?" Harry asked. "Unknown. Rookwood will come. He needs to confirm the trace personally to validate the Darkhold intelligence. Malfoy will not come. He doesn't do field work, but he'll have sent people alongside Rookwood, Death Eaters." Strange said the word with the particular neutrality of someone for whom the category was a known quantity. "High-level ones, if Malfoy is managing this as carefully as the intelligence suggests." "Bellatrix," Harry said. "Possibly," Strange said. He met Harry's eyes with a directness that didn't cushion the fact. "Probably." Harry absorbed this. Thought about the Department of Mysteries, about Sirius, about the cold, gleeful viciousness of the woman who had taken pleasure in everything she'd done there. He felt nothing that could be called fear, something colder and more specific. The knowledge of a specific threat held at the correct distance, being used as information rather than weight. "Okay," he said. "What do I do if I'm in direct engagement with her?" "Don't fight her the way she expects to be fought," Strange said immediately. "She's trained in conventional wizarding combat and she's exceptionally good at it. She'll read standard defensive responses and she'll be faster than you in a duel by conventional methods." He tilted his head. "But she has no framework for dimensional displacement. None of Voldemort's people do use the fabric." Harry nodded. "Harry," Strange said, and his voice dropped just slightly from the operational register. "You are better than she is, not because of natural talent, though you have it, because of what you've learned in the last month and because of how you've learned it." He held Harry's eyes. "Don't play her game, play yours." Harry held his gaze for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Strange nodded. He turned to Hermione. "Open the portal in 5 minutes. Give us time to get into position." He moved to the center of the room and raised his hand. Hermione caught Harry's arm before he could follow. He turned. She looked at him for a second with the unguarded expression she'd shown for a moment after the procedure, the 70% composed one. Then she said, "Don't let anything stupid happen to you." "Define stupid," he said. "You know exactly what I mean." He did. "I'll be fine," he said. Then, because it was true and she'd said she was slightly afraid and he wanted her to have something real to hold, "We're going to win this." She held his eyes for a moment. "I know," she said, and she did know. He could see it, clear and certain. She let his arm go. Harry stepped through Strange's portal. Tintagel at 3 in the morning was extraordinary in the specific way that ancient places are extraordinary at night. The ruins of the castle standing on their headland above the Atlantic, dark stone against dark sky, the sea below making its permanent noise, the smell of salt and old earth, and the specific dimensional character of the place that Harry had been attuning to for 3 days, and which now felt as familiar as his own name. Strange let the portal close and they stood in the ruins' main courtyard in silence for a moment, both of them extending their attunement into the space. The anchors were where Harry had placed them. He felt them in the fabric like fixed points, each one a deliberate structural marker he'd set with the patience and precision Strange had been building in him for a month. The outer perimeter, 12 kilometers of contained space. The inner set, arranged in the courtyard's specific geometry. "The inner anchors," Strange said quietly, feeling them. He was still for a moment. "Concentric," he said. 3 rings. "Yes," Harry said. "You can close them independently." "Yes." Strange was quiet for another moment. "We'll discuss the full extent of what you can do at range when this is over," he said, and moved to the outer wall of the courtyard, positioning himself with the ruins at his back and the open headland ahead. Field of view, Harry noted, maximum. Harry moved to the inner courtyard's high wall. He climbed it in 4 moves, old stone, good handholds, and lay flat along the top with his sling ring on his right hand and his wand in his back pocket. Felt the entire site in the fabric, all of it at once, the anchors and the perimeter and the sea wind and the dimensional character of the Arthurian layer beneath everything, deep and still. He waited 6 minutes. The trace would be active now. Hermione would have opened the false portal. He felt it faintly, the specific warmth of her signature carrying the sanctum's character, visible in the fabric as an active dimensional aperture pointing at this site. He counted his own heartbeats, steady, 8 minutes. He felt them before he saw them. 3 apparition signatures hit the perimeter simultaneously, not the clean pop of standard apparition but the more controlled, muted version that trained Death Eaters used for tactical entry, minimizing noise and magical signature. 3 points in the outer field, 200 meters from the ruins, then 2 more, inner field. Then 1 more, different from the others, the apparition signature reading as colder, more deliberate, carrying a dimensional weight that Harry recognized immediately, not from his own experience but from the specific quality of it, the same quality he'd felt in Hermione's attunement reading of the Horcrux. Bellatrix Lestrange. She had a Horcrux fragment's quality of coldness in her magic, not because she was a Horcrux but because she had been so deeply saturated with Voldemort's influence for so long that her magical signature had taken on its character. And beside her a different presence, strange, asymmetric, layered in an unusual way, not clean, improvised. Rookwood. Harry held his breath, let the fabric tell him where each person was. 3 at the perimeter, outer guard, holding position. 2 advancing from the inner field toward the ruins. Rookwood and Bellatrix moving separately, parallel approach, 30 meters apart, 7 people total. He filed each position, held them in his dimensional awareness simultaneously, the way he'd been building toward for weeks, the full sight attunement paying out exactly as he'd hoped. He looked over the wall at Strange. Strange was looking at him. Harry held up 7 fingers and Strange nodded, already knowing most of it, and they had worked together often enough now that the next 30 seconds happened without words. Strange moved right along the outer wall. Harry stayed on the top of the inner wall and watched the ruins entrance. The 2 advanced figures came through it first. Not Death Eaters Harry recognized. Order Intelligence had a name for one of them, a man called Selwyn, tall and aggressive in his movement, wand already up. The second was younger, female, sharp-featured, moving with the careful precision of someone recently recruited and trying to prove something. They came into the courtyard looking at exactly the wrong things. They were looking for the dimensional signature of the sanctum, for the building, for the physical space they'd traced. They were looking up at the ruins, at the sky, at the places a defensive position would be obvious. Harry was lying flat on top of a stone wall 12 feet above them, and he was in the fabric, not the visual field, and they didn't feel him at all. He waited until both of them were fully in the courtyard. Then he closed the first inner anchor ring. The perimeter activated with a sound like a deep breath being taken, not dramatic, not a bang, just a structural shift in the fabric that both Death Eaters felt immediately. Selwyn spun, wand up. The woman backed toward the wall. "It's a trap," Selwyn said. "Yes," Harry said from the top of the wall above them. Selwyn threw a curse upward, red, stunning, probably fast and well-aimed. Harry rolled off the inside of the wall before it landed, dropping into the courtyard and hitting the ground in a forward roll that came up in motion, and he didn't reach for his wand. He reached for the fabric. The displacement hit Selwyn from his left side, the gravitational pull technique, space shifting around his feet, and Selwyn stumbled hard. Harry was already moving, already closing on the second inner ring around the 10-foot space between them, and when the second ring closed it took the dimensional quality out of the space, contained it, made it dimensionally inert, and conventional magic in a dimensionally inert contained space became unreliable in specific ways Strange had explained in week 2. Selwyn tried to cast again. The spell formed and died halfway. He looked at his wand with an expression of genuine confusion. "The perimeter's interfering with conventional magic," Harry told him not unkindly. "You can still move, you're just going to stand there and wait, or you're going to make this difficult." The young woman threw herself at Harry physically, wand forgotten, which was unexpected. He caught her momentum with a fabric fold that turned her sideways rather than blocking, and she hit the ground to his right, already off balance. He folded the space above her into a containment, not violent, just present, a section of dimensionally dense fabric that had the physical quality of something extremely heavy in the air. She tried to stand and couldn't, pressed flat by the weight of the compressed fold. She said some things Harry chose not to process. Selwyn, recognizing the arithmetic of the situation, stood still. He was not a stupid man. Harry turned toward the ruins entrance. Outside, Strange had engaged the outer 3. Harry felt it in the fabric. Strange's dimensional combat was completely different from anything Harry did, and watching it in dimensional terms was like watching a master craftsman work. No wasted motion, no force applied where precision could serve. He felt Strange take apart the 3-point outer guard formation in the time it took Harry to look at the courtyard entrance and back, using a combination of targeted displacements and a technique Harry had been shown in theory but not yet attempted, something Strange called dimensional compression. which reduced the operational range of a practitioner's magic to roughly 6 inches around their wand hand. One of the three was already on the ground. Another had a portal wrapped around his upper half in a way that wasn't going to hurt him, but wasn't going to let him go anywhere either. The third, Harry felt it, was trying to apparate out and hitting the outer perimeter, which was like trying to drive through a wall, which left Rookwood and Bellatrix. Harry found Rookwood's signature in the fabric. He was approaching the ruins from the east side, which put the wall between him and Harry, and he was doing something careful and specific, not attacking yet, reading. The Darkhold perception was active. Harry felt it differently now than he would have a month ago, not as an attack but as an imbalance, a pocket of the fabric that was wrong in the specific way that Ch Thon's magic was wrong, pre-structural, existing in the gap the fabric had closed around. Rookwood was reading the Tintagel sight through the Darkhold lens. Harry looked at the east wall, thought quickly. If Rookwood read the sight clearly enough through the Darkhold perception, he'd identify the perimeter anchors, understand the structure of the trap, and potentially find a way to work around it. His improvised, unconventional approach was dangerous specifically because Harry didn't have a model for it. Move first. Don't let him finish reading. Harry went over the east wall the way he'd gone over the inner wall, fast, clean, and dropped into the space between the inner ruin and the outer field, and Rookwood was 20 meters away, standing still with both hands raised in the Darkhold reading stance, and he looked up when Harry landed. Rookwood was not what Harry expected. He was in his 50s, ordinary-looking, the kind of face you'd forget in a crowd. Looked at Harry with the specific expression of a man who has done an analysis and found the result more interesting than predicted. "You neutralized it," Rookwood said, not accusatory, genuinely curious. "The Horcrux, I felt the signal drop yesterday, I thought." He stopped. "The Sorcerer Supreme," he said. "He's been training you." "He has," Harry said. Rookwood's hands were still in the reading stance, the Darkhold perception active, running over Harry with that pre-structural attention. Harry felt it on his interface, different from attunement, colder, like something scraping rather than touching. He held his center firm. "Extraordinary," Rookwood said quietly, still reading. "You were carrying it your whole life and you didn't." He stopped himself again. His expression shifted, not warmth, something more complicated than that. Academic admiration from someone who was also going to try to kill him. "You're remarkable, Mr. Potter. I want you to know I don't have any particular desire for this to be violent." "That's convenient," Harry said, "because I've got the whole site perimeter locked and 6 of your people are already contained." Rookwood looked at him steadily. "The Darkhold perception can read your anchor placement," he said carefully. "Every point, the structure of the perimeter is visible to me." He tilted his head. "I could dismantle it." "You could try," Harry said. "But the Darkhold works in the pre-structural gap and the anchors are structural. You'd be trying to deconstruct something using a tool that operates in a different layer." He paused. "Strange explained this to me in week 2. Rookwood went still. Something moved across his face, the reassessment quick and visible. "You've been taught specifically about the Darkhold." "I've been taught about everything," Harry said, and this was the moment. Harry felt it, the shape of it, the specific decision point that Strange had described in the combat theory, where a confrontation tips from potential to certain. Rookwood was calculating. He was good, faster, and more creative than most, Strange had said. He'd find something if Harry gave him time. Harry didn't give him time. He reached into the fabric at Rookwood's feet, the gravitational technique, the deep pull, and displaced him hard 3 meters back, knocking the reading stance apart and interrupting the Darkhold perception mid-flow. Then he folded the space Rookwood occupied into the nearest anchor ring and pulled it closed. Rookwood hit the dimensional containment and stopped. He tried to cast. The improvised displacement of the Darkhold perception had left his magic disoriented, not permanently, not for long, but for now. "I don't want to hurt you either," Harry said. He was breathing evenly. "Stay in the ring." Rookwood looked at him with something that was not quite respect and not quite anger and was probably both. He stayed in the ring. Harry turned back toward the inner ruins, and Bellatrix Lestrange stepped out of the shadows. She had not been where Harry's attunement had placed her. She'd moved while he was engaged with Rookwood, using the engagement as cover, and she was standing in the entrance to the inner courtyard with her wand up and her expression carrying all the bright, particular madness that Harry associated with the worst moments of the last 2 years. She looked at him. She looked at the contained figures he'd left behind him. She looked at the dimensional anchors, couldn't see them, didn't have Rookwood's perception, but the way the space felt would be registering even for an unattuned practitioner. "Hello, Potter," she said, and her voice had the quality it always had, gleeful, specific, enjoying the present moment with a completeness that was the most disturbing thing about her. Harry looked back at her. He felt calm. Specific and certain and completely calm, which was different from the Department of Mysteries, different from every encounter with her before, and she saw the difference. He could tell from the way something shifted in her expression, a quick reassessment. "Bella," he said. He used the name deliberately, the shortened version, Sirius's name for her. He felt her register it. Her expression went cold. "You sound like him," she said. "I know," Harry said. "He always said you hated that." She threw a curse at him. No warning, no preamble. It came fast, and it was not the red of a stunner and not the green of the killing curse, but a deep, sustained purple that hit the air where Harry had been standing when she cast it. He wasn't there. He was 3 feet to the right, already moving, already in the fabric, and the displacement left the curse with nothing to hit and sent it past his shoulder into the stone wall behind him where it carved a 10-inch furrow. She was fast. Strange had said it, and it was completely accurate. She was extraordinarily fast, reading his move before it completed and adjusting the follow-up curse coming from a different angle. Harry folded the space between them and the curse bent around the fold and missed his left arm by about 4 inches. Interesting, Bellatrix said, moving right, and there was something in her voice beyond the madness now, something focused. She was reading him the way a fighter reads a fighter. What is that? That's not Hogwarts teaching. No, Harry agreed, moving to match her, keeping the angle between them, letting the fabric tell him where she was going before she arrived. It's not. She threw 3 curses in rapid succession, the pattern fast and overlapping, designed to leave no gap between them. Harry let the fabric solve 2 of them, displacement on the first, a fold on the second, and caught the third on a conjured partial portal, the curse going through the aperture and arriving 6 feet to Bellatrix's left where it hit the ground. She stopped. She looked at the portal's afterimage in the air. She looked at Harry. You can redirect curses, she said. Yes, Harry said. Something passed through her expression that was briefly, genuinely not madness but something older, not fear. Something like the recognition of a new thing. Then the madness came back, brighter, and she smiled. Wonderful, she said, and the word had in it a sincere delight that was more alarming than the curses. Wonderful, he'll want to see this, he'll want Bellatrix, Harry said. Look at the sight. She was already casting. He let it come and folded it away and looked at her steadily. 6 of yours are contained, he said. Rookwood is in an anchor ring. Strange is holding the outer perimeter. He held her eyes. You're very good, I'm not underestimating you, but you're alone in a location built as a trap and everyone who was supposed to help you is already stopped. He paused. You can keep fighting or you can look at what's actually happening. Oh, Potter, she said, and her voice had dropped to something quieter, something that was its own kind of warning. You think I care about any of them? She threw the killing curse. Harry felt it coming, not the curse, but the disturbance it created in the fabric the fraction of a second before it was cast, the savage tear of it, the wrongness that Strange had described in the theory sessions and that Harry had felt in the graveyard, and that was unmistakable once you knew what it was. He felt it and he moved, not a fold, not a displacement. He opened a full portal. Not large, 2 feet across, placed precisely between himself and the curse's path, and the killing curse went through it, through the aperture, through the dimensional space between here and wherever the portal exited, and arrived in the open air above the Cornish cliffs at 1 in the morning where it dissipated harmlessly into the dark. Bellatrix stared at the portal's closing edge. Harry lowered his hand. She looked at him with an expression that had finally, completely shed the gleeful performance. What was underneath it was not what he'd expected, not fear, not rage, something almost like bewilderment, like someone seeing a thing that shouldn't be possible and not yet having a category for it. You moved the killing curse, she said. Yes, Harry said, I moved the killing curse. Silence. Who are you? She said, not rhetorically, an actual question. Harry Potter, he said. You've always known who I am, you just didn't know what I could do. She stood in the ruined courtyard in the dark above the Atlantic and looked at him for a long moment. And then she made the decision he'd expected her to make. She apparated. Not out through the perimeter, which would have hit the anchor wall, but sideways, a short distance jump to the ruin's far edge where she could get past the outer boundary. She was good enough and fast enough to find the gap in the perimeter before he could close it. He let her go. She hit the outer boundary, found the gap, and was gone with the controlled crack of expert disapparition. Harry breathed, let the engagement settle, filed everything. Then he heard Strange behind him. Strange came through the ruin's entrance with the controlled economy of movement that meant the outer engagement was fully resolved. He looked at Harry, he looked at the contained figures, he looked at the closed anchor rings. He stood at the courtyard entrance and took in all of it with a single comprehensive sweep of his dimensional sense. Bellatrix, he said. Gone, Harry said. I let her go. Strange looked at him. She'll report to Voldemort, Harry said. She'll tell him exactly what she saw, what I did, that I moved the killing curse. He met Strange's eyes. I want him to know, I want him to have to think about that. Strange was quiet for a moment. You wanted him to be afraid, he said. I wanted him to recalculate, Harry said. Same thing. Strange held his eyes for a long moment. Yes, he said, all right. He looked at the contained figures. We'll need to hand these to the Order of the Phoenix. They have facilities for the Sanctum signal hit them both simultaneously. Not a distress signal. Hermione hadn't sent a distress signal. It was something different, something Strange had not specified during the briefing, a dimensional pulse that carried a very specific quality that Harry didn't have words for but felt immediately as urgent. Strange turned toward the ocean. She found something, he said. In the sanctum, Harry said. In the mirror, Strange said. He was already raising his hand for the portal. Come. They came through into the octagonal room and Hermione was at the center of it, standing rather than sitting, the catalogue open in her hand and her expression carrying that specific quality of someone who has found a thing and is running the implications at full speed. She looked at them both, took them in, assessed the sight of the engagement on them the way she always assessed things, quickly and comprehensively, decided they were uninjured, moved on. Nagini, she said. What about her? Strange said. She's here, Hermione said. Not New York in the dimensional sense. She's been in the fabric near this building for at least 6 hours. She turned to the catalogue and the mirror diagram she'd drawn in it. After I opened the false portal, I kept the mirror active and I was watching the Horcrux signatures for any change, and Nagini's signal, the mobile one, has been circling the Sanctum's dimensional perimeter for, she paused, since we left for Tintagel. Harry felt the Horcrux mapping click into a new shape in his mind. She followed the dimensional screen, he said. When Strange put it up, the screen created an edge in the fabric. Something on the outside could follow that edge like a wall. Yes, Strange said. He had gone to the window and was looking down at the street. And if Nagini is here, she was sent here with a purpose. He turned from the window. Voldemort felt the Horcrux neutralization. He felt the Tintagel engagement. Bellatrix will reach him within the hour. He has been moving pieces. He looked at both of them with an expression that was fully operational, stripped of everything except clarity. He sent Nagini to find us before we could find the other Horcruxes. She doesn't know where the Sanctum is exactly, Hermione said. She's circling the perimeter, not approaching. She's a Horcrux, Harry said. She can feel the empty thread where my connection to the network was. She's trying to orient on it. He paused. She can't find it because it's gone. But she knows the general vicinity, Strange said. The perimeter screen is opaque to Darkhold perception, but it has a dimensional edge, and that edge is something hit the Sanctum's outer wall, not physically, dimensionally. A pulse of intentional energy, structured and deliberate, and carrying a quality that was nothing like the Kolkata creature, nothing like Rookwood's improvised technique. This was raw, ancient, dark in the specific sense that Strange used the word, drawing on the pre-structural layer Thon's gap, the Darkhold fragment. Someone was using the Darkhold fragment's full capability against the Sanctum's dimensional screen. Strange moved to the center of the room. His hands came up and the Sanctum responded around him, the building's centuries of accumulated awareness engaging with the speed of something that had been waiting for exactly this moment, the walls doing something that Harry felt in the fabric as an enormous, coordinated resistance. That's not Nagini, Hermione said. No, Strange said, his voice tight with effort. It's not. He was holding the screen together, reinforcing it against the Darkhold pressure, and the effort was significant. Harry could feel it, the scale of what the fragment was pushing with. He's not here himself, it's being channeled through the fragment remotely, through whoever is holding it. Who has the fragment? Harry said. After Rookwood, Malfoy, Strange said through clenched teeth. The screen shuddered. He's been sitting back this whole time, building up to. The screen flexed hard. This. Harry looked at Hermione. She was already looking at him. We closed the fragment, she said. The same way we closed the Kolkata breach. The Darkhold works through the pre-structural gap. If we reconstitute the fabric at the point of the attack, you'd be working against active Darkhold pressure, Strange said. Not passive. Malfoy is channeling it in real time. I know, she said. Hermione, Strange said, still holding the screen. This is not Kolkata. Darkhold's dimensional layer predates the fabric. You can't reconstitute around something that exists before the structure you're reconstituting. No, she said, but I can reconstitute the structure fast enough that the gap closes around it, around the Darkhold's channel. She turned to Harry. I need the fabric side. You've been working at range for a month. The attack is coming through the wall at, she attuned, read the angle, southwest corner, second story. Can you reach that from? Easily, Harry said. I'll pull the structure into coherence. You hold it in place while I do. The channel closes because the gap it's coming through no longer exists. Strange looked at her for a half-second that contained a complete assessment of the plan. The Darkhold pressure will hit you directly the moment you start working, he said. I know, she said again. Strange looked at Harry. She's right, Harry said, and she's strong enough. I'll hold the fabric, you hold the screen. Strange looked at both of them for one more moment. Then he turned back to the screen and said, Go. Harry and Hermione moved to the southwest corner. Harry felt the attack site in the fabric immediately. The Darkhold channel was wrong in the specific way that pre-structural things were wrong, a gap in reality's fabric that shouldn't exist, through which Malfoy's channeled power was pressing with methodical, sustained intent. The Sanctum screen was holding but thinning. Harry reached into the fabric at the attack point and held it, not fighting the channel, holding the structure on either side of it, keeping it stable so it didn't tear further while Hermione worked. It was like holding the edges of a wound together. Hermione put both hands to the wall and closed her eyes. Harry felt her reach the Darkhold channel and felt it hit her, a wave of that pre-structural cold, the specific wrongness of Thon's magic pressing back against her attunement. She absorbed it, didn't stop, went deeper into the reconstitution work with a focused and absolutely unintimidated quality that made Harry grip the fabric harder and hold. She was extraordinary. He had known that for years in the abstract way you know things about people you're close to, the accumulated evidence of 7 years. But watching her work in the fabric in real time at this level under this pressure was different. She was building dimensional structure into the gap itself, not around it, not closing it from the outside, but filling it, creating coherence where pre-structural void had been, pulling the fabric into configuration with a quality of architectural will that was, as far as Harry could tell, entirely her own, something she developed from the reconstitution technique and the Norway decompression and 40 straight days of making the impossible her standard. The Darkhold channel shrank. Malfoy pressed harder. Harry felt it through the fabric, doubled then tripled pressure through the fragment, pushing back against Hermione's reconstitution. She didn't stop. She went faster, building the structure quicker, staying ahead of the pressure, and Harry felt the fabric between his hands trying to respond to both, to the Darkhold gap's pull and to Hermione's structural coherence, and he held it, precise and immovable, between the two forces, and then he did something he hadn't planned. He opened a portal, tiny 6 inches across, precisely placed at the Darkhold channel's entry point, not inside the gap at its leading edge where the pre-structural energy was transitioning into the standard fabric. The portal's edge caught the channel's energy exactly the way Strange had described in week 2, a parry, not a block. The energy redirected into the portal's aperture. Where it went, Harry directed with complete intent, back through the fragment's source. Back down the channel toward Malfoy. The scream they heard from the fabric's other end was distant, brief, and then silent. The Darkhold channel closed. Hermione's reconstitution sealed it with a final, definitive motion, both hands pressing the new structure into place, the fabric accepting it the way it always accepted her work, as if it had been waiting to be what she made it. The sanctum screen steadied, held. Strange let it settle and dropped his hands and stood in the center of the room, looking at the wall, at the place where the attack had been, at nothing visible to the eye that was not also an attunement sense. "Malfoy," he said. "He'll be affected," Harry said. "I redirected the Darkhold energy back through the fragment to its source. He was channeling it actively. The blowback will have been severe," Strange said. He looked at Harry with an expression that had moved past assessment into something more immediate. "You improvised that?" "Yes." "Using a technique from week 2? "Yes." Strange looked at the wall for another moment. Then he looked at Hermione, who was standing with her forehead against the stone, both hands still on the surface, catching her breath. The Darkhold pressure had been significant, and she'd taken all of it directly and come out the other side with the structural work complete and the channel closed, which Strange had said was theoretically possible with a master practitioner and that she'd done in her 5th week. "Hermione," Strange said. She turned and leaned her back against the wall, breathing evenly. "You've destroyed the Darkhold fragment," he said. The reconstitution filled the pre-structural gap it was operating through. "It can't be reactivated." She absorbed this. "Good," she said. "The intelligence on Nagini's location," Strange said, moving to the window again. "She's still circling." Hermione pushed off the wall and went to the mirror in the east corridor. Harry followed. She attuned, and the mirror showed Nagini's cold signature, still moving, still circling, the Horcrux's pull visible in the dimensional fabric as a slow, regular orbit around the sanctum's perimeter. "She's lost her directive," Harry said. "Malfoy was directing her, now he's out of commission. She's circling on instinct." He looked at Hermione. "Can you read the exact position?" "Yes," she said. She tilted her head. "She's on the street, 1 block south." Harry looked at Strange. Strange looked back at him. "She's a Horcrux," Harry said, "but she's also a living creature. That's a complication." "It is," Strange said carefully. "The other Horcruxes, the locket, the cup, the diadem, we destroy the objects. Nagini she's Voldemort's," Hermione said quietly from the mirror. "He made her into what she is. She doesn't have a choice about what she carries." The room held that for a moment. Harry felt the cold spot in his own interface, the inert, neutralized fragment that had been the Horcrux in his scar. He thought about what Strange had done, dimensional surgery, making something inert without destroying the host. "Can you do for Nagini what you did for me?" he asked Strange. Strange looked at him for a long moment. "The snake is not a willing participant in the procedure," he said, "and she is Voldemort's primary familiar. He will feel any intervention immediately. It would trigger a response." "He already knows something's wrong," Harry said. "Malfoy, the engagement at Tintagel, the fragment destroyed." He held Strange's eyes. "He knows we're active wherever we are. The surgical option removes a Horcrux without killing, and removing it without killing might be the thing that makes Voldemort come to us instead of us going to him." A pause. "If he thinks killing Nagini won't work anymore, he loses control of his timeline," Hermione said from the mirror. "His entire strategy assumes he can protect himself by protecting the Horcruxes. If one of his Horcruxes is neutralized non-destructively, he doesn't know how to factor that in. He can't." She turned from the mirror. "His whole architecture of immortality depends on the binary. The Horcrux survives or the Horcrux is destroyed and he's weakened. A third option breaks his model entirely." Strange was quiet for a long moment, looking at the floor with both hands behind his back. Then he said, "Yes." He went to the window, looked at the street below. "I'll need both of you," he said. "Harry manages the snake's physical response. She'll fight. Hermione holds the perimeter around the working space." He turned. "It'll take 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, Voldemort will know something is happening to her. He will come." "We know," Harry said. "He will come here," Strange said, "to the sanctum, because the Darkhold signal is gone and Malfoy is incapacitated and we have his last Horcrux and he does not have the patience to be methodical when he is afraid." "Good," Harry said. "Let him come here. This is where we want him." Strange looked at him. "You said it in week 2, Harry said. "The most significant acts of magic create the largest disturbance in the fabric. The largest disturbances tell us the most." He met Strange's eyes. "We've been learning to read the fabric for 5 weeks. When Voldemort arrives, we read him, we see everything, and we respond to what's actually there, not to what we're afraid is there." Strange held his eyes for a long moment. "You're not afraid of him," Strange said, not surprised. "Just noting it. I'm not afraid of him," Harry said. I was afraid of what he represented, the thing that had been pressing against the inside of my head my whole life. That's gone now. He touched his forehead briefly, the habit of years, then dropped his hand. He's just a man who made terrible choices, a very powerful, very dangerous man who made terrible choices, and we are better equipped to deal with him right now in this building than we have ever been anywhere. He looked at Strange. Right. Strange held his gaze. Yes, he said. Right. They went downstairs. Nagini came in from the street without subtlety when Strange opened the sanctum's outer door. She had been circling on instinct, and instinct responded to an open door by entering. She came through as a massive, purposeful wave of scaled movement, her Horcrux gold filling the entrance hall with that specific wrongness. Harry was ready for her. He'd been ready since the moment they'd decided on this. He reached into the fabric around her with both hands and held her movement the way you hold a current in water, not fighting it but surrounding it, keeping it in the channel he'd defined, guiding her into the large space of the entrance hall and keeping her there without making contact. She fought it. She was a 12-foot snake, and she was Voldemort's familiar, and she had in her the weight of a soul fragment that was far older and far angrier than the one Harry had carried, and she fought with everything that was in her, physically and dimensionally. Harry held. Hermione built the perimeter around them, the architectural attunement she'd been developing for 5 weeks brought to bear in real time, building a containment that could hold a live Horcrux host without harming her, and she built it fast, faster than Harry could track, the structure appearing in the fabric with the clean certainty of someone who knows exactly what they're building. Strange went into the interface. Harry felt him working, the same quality of presence as the procedure in the octagonal room, precise and careful, and with that specific quality of caring in the surgical sense. He felt Nagini register it and rage against the containment with a force that staggered Harry's hold for 3 seconds before he re-established it, leaning into the fabric with everything he had. Every anchor and displacement and presence he'd built in 5 weeks brought fully to bear on keeping one enormous snake still for 10 minutes. Hermione's perimeter held. Strange's work progressed. 8 minutes. Nagini's physical struggle eased, not because she'd given up but because the dimensional isolation of the fragment from her core was separating the Horcrux's directive from her own volition, and what was left when the directive was gone was just a large snake, confused and tired and gradually no longer compelled by something it had never chosen to carry. 10 minutes. Strange withdrew. The Horcrux in Nagini was inert. She lay in the entrance hall, large and still, her scales moving with the steady rhythm of ordinary breathing. The Horcrux's cold was gone from her signature. What remained was simply an animal. Harry let the fabric hold ease. He breathed, then he felt it. The sanctum's dimensional awareness engaged, the deep, old attention of the building snapping to full alert in a way Harry had never felt it do before. In the fabric coming from across the Atlantic and then suddenly, impossibly near, a presence unlike anything Harry had felt in 5 weeks of training, large and fractured and deliberate, carrying the dimensional signature of a soul torn apart and rebuilt wrong, the specific broken character of someone who had made themselves into a Horcrux network and lived in it. Voldemort had arrived. He did not knock, he did not announce himself. He arrived in the street outside the Sanctum Sanctorum in a wave of intentional presence that pressed against the building's screen like weather, and the building pushed back with 12 centuries of accumulated resistance. Harry looked at Strange. Strange looked at Harry. The Horcruxes, Harry said quickly. The remaining ones, the locket, Grimmauld Place, the cup you'll know from Hermione's readings, the diadem, Hogwarts. Is there a way to? I sent word to Wong 2 days ago, Strange said. Has the locations from Hermione's catalogue. The remaining objects are being addressed simultaneously by practitioners I trust. He met Harry's eyes. By the time this engagement ends, they're all gone, Harry said. All gone, Strange said. Harry nodded. He felt in the dimensional fabric outside the sanctum's screen Voldemort pressing against it with the full weight of a fractured, furious, still extraordinarily dangerous soul, and felt the screen hold, and felt the sanctum hold around him. He picked up his sling ring. He thought about everything, the roof of the garden shed at Privet Drive, the first morning in the octagonal room, Kolkata and Norway and Prague, the night in the pre-dawn quiet when he'd found his center and held it against the Horcrux's press, the specific clean feeling of a boundary established and maintained. He thought about Sirius, not with grief, with clarity. The specific kind that comes when the person you're grieving would have been here for this moment and you can almost hear what they'd have said. He thought Sirius would have been here for this moment. He thought Sirius would have been standing exactly where Strange was standing, and he'd have said something irreverent and completely incorrect and then done something extraordinary. Harry thought, okay then. Strange opened the sanctum's outer door. The night outside was alive with the specific wrongness of Voldemort's presence, and Harry Potter, who had been trained for 5 weeks by the Sorcerer Supreme in the mystic arts and who was no longer afraid, walked through it. Hermione was beside him. Strange came through last, and behind them the sanctum breathed, old and present and absolutely certain. The street was empty of anyone but Voldemort, who stood in it in his stillness and looked at Harry with the red eyes that Harry had been looking back at since he was 1 year old. And something moved in those eyes when they found Harry, not the expected triumph, not the cold pleasure of a foregone conclusion. Something different, something that was the beginning of recalculation. Harry had a ring on his hand and his wand in his back pocket, and 5 weeks of training that had gone down to the root of what magic was, and he had Hermione beside him, and he had Strange behind him, and he had the sanctum at his back. He had, in the most specific sense of the word, everything. Tom, he said, not as provocation, as definition, as the naming of a specific, knowable, finite thing. Voldemort looked at him. And Harry, who had spent 5 weeks learning to read the dimensional fabric, who could feel every disturbance, every distortion, every moment of intent before it became action, read what was in Voldemort's presence with total clarity. The fear was real. It was there, underneath the fury, underneath the enormous accumulated power, underneath the fractured soul's terrible will. The fear was there because the Horcrux network was silent, one by one, and the boy was standing in a New York street at 4 in the morning looking back at him with eyes that were not afraid. Harry raised his right hand. The fight was not what Voldemort expected. It was not a duel. It was not an exchange of curses in a corridor, not a graveyard ritual, not a ministry atrium with witnesses. It was 3 people who understood the dimensional fabric of reality standing in it, and using that understanding with everything they had, and it lasted 19 minutes, and at the end of it Voldemort was not dead, not yet. The body had to be dealt with separately, and that was a separate problem, but contained, held in a dimensional anchor array that Harry had built at range around the street's perimeter before the door opened. Because he'd placed those anchors 6 days ago when he'd decided this was where it would happen. The anchor's containment held against Voldemort's power the way the rebuilt Kolkata breach had held against the creature. Not easily. Not without Harry and Hermione both doing things neither of them had done before in the fabric. Improvising with 5 weeks of foundation the way Strange had said improvisation should work, from understanding, not from desperation. Strange did something at the end that Harry didn't entirely follow. A dimensional technique of a depth and specificity that required 17 years of practice and a quality of attunement that Harry might have in a decade. And when it was done, Voldemort's remaining soul, the fraction of the fraction that had survived its Horcruxes being neutralized one by one during the course of the night, was contained. Not dead, contained. What happens to it? Harry asked, standing in the street in the early morning, the city beginning its first light. Contained souls diminish, Strange said. He sounded tired, which was the first time Harry had heard anything like fatigue from him. Without a body, without Horcruxes to anchor it, without the dimensional network that was sustaining it, it diminishes, in weeks. He looked at Harry. It's over. Harry stood in the street and looked at the New York sky going pale at its eastern edge. Hermione was beside him. He'd been beside him for 19 minutes of something extraordinary, and she was still there, slightly out of breath, her hair thoroughly escaped from its braid, the catalogue somehow still in her left hand, her ring still on her right. She looked at him, he looked at her. Well, she said. Yeah, he said. She looked at the sky. Hogwarts in 3 weeks, she said. Yeah, 6th year. Yeah, it's going to feel very different, he said. I know. She looked at him sideways. Good different. Yeah, he said. Good different. Strange came to stand beside them, looking at the same pale sky. He said nothing for a moment. 3 people in the street at dawn outside a building that had been standing since the 12th century, and the morning coming in off the Atlantic, and the city starting its enormous ordinary day all around them. Both of you, Strange said, have a standing invitation to the sanctum. That doesn't end when the academic year starts. Harry looked at him. What does that mean exactly? It means what it says, Strange said. Practitioners of your caliber don't stop training because of a school schedule. A pause, and the sanctum has, as I mentioned, opinions about the people in it. He looked at them both with that expression, the one that wasn't quite anything else. It's quite fond of you. Strange, Hermione said. Are you saying you'd like us to come back? Strange looked at the sky. I'm saying the sanctum would be dimensionally quieter if you did. He put his hands in his coat pockets. I find dimensional quiet useful for reading. Harry felt the specific warm thing that he'd learned over 5 weeks to recognize as Strange's version of affection, expressed at the precise remove that Strange's precise character required. He looked at Hermione. She was looking at Strange with an expression that had that 70% composed quality again, the kind where the other 30% was showing at the edges. We'll come back, Harry said. Obviously, Hermione said. The morning came in off the Atlantic, gold and certain. The war was over. The work was not. There were Horcruxes confirmed destroyed by Wung's people. There were Death Eaters to account for. There was Malfoy to deal with. There was Hogwarts in 6th year and every ordinary and extraordinary thing that followed. There was a conversation with Dumbledore that Harry was genuinely looking forward to, which was new. There was a conversation with Ron that was going to be complicated and then fine, which was how all conversations with Ron eventually went. There was Strange's library, which Hermione had not finished, not even close. There was the Tintagel perimeter to take down. There was the Norwegian fault to monitor. There was a world full of dimensional fabric that Harry could read and work with, and that was going to keep being complicated and interesting and occasionally very dangerous for the foreseeable future. He looked at his sling ring, turned it on his fingers. Then he put it in his pocket and walked back inside the sanctum, and the door closed behind him, and the building breathed, and the city went on being the city.